Did you know that Sanji's Diable Jambe was foreshadowed all the way back on Baratier? In fact, Sanji's inspiration comes from a most unlikely source, the ever-powersome Pearl. During his fight with Sanji, Pearl set himself on fire which had no effect on Pearl for checks notes reasons, and in fact, Pearl even coated himself in blue flames, which Sanji has now mimicked with a freed Jambe. So I suppose you could, and in fact I will say that Sanji has only just very recently caught up to where Pearl was at the beginning of the series. Come to think of it, Sanji didn't even beat Pearl, it was Gin who did it. But now here's 55 more facts about Sanji. According to author of the pirate comic Eiichiro Oda, many people speculated that Sanji's design was based on Leonardo DiCaprio. Remembering that Sanji was introduced in 1988, 1 year after Titanic came out, so this was like peak Leo craze. But in truth, Sanji's aesthetics were modeled after Steve Buscemi's character Mr. Pink in Reservoir Dogs, a role which Quentin Tarantino originally wrote for himself. So weirdly enough, Sanji's entire design hinges on the whims of Quentin Tarantino. If he decided to play the part himself, then we would have ended up with a radically different cook. And I'm not saying that Oda would have based the design on the alternate Mr. Pink, but he would have had to look elsewhere. But speaking of alternates, a very different Sanji does exist in Oda's alternate One Piece timeline, one which goes much further into the future as we see Sanji go through a bit of a Fabio phase in his 40s before ultimately settling on inheriting the aesthetics of Zeph by the age of 60. However, there is also a bad alternate timeline, and in this dark universe, Sanji becomes an increasingly obese chain smoker and eventually inherits both the Germa Kingdom and the fashion sense of his biological father Vinsmoke Judge, a man who refuses to do the household ironing, but whose story is filled with irony, as Sanji is the only Vinsmoke sibling who actually inherited Judge's biological characteristics, specifically the blonde hair. The others were so altered by fictional science that, eyebrows aside, they became completely different globs of DNA. And while it took over 800 chapters for us, the readers, to finally be invited to Vinsmoke family dinner, Sanji's heritage was foreshadowed in a multitude of ways beforehand, such as during the Jaya shipwreck, where Sanji lingers on a photo of a woman who reminds him of his mother. Meanwhile, when using a snail phone to contact Crocodile, Sanji used the alias of Mr. Prince, which also makes perfect sense because Sanji is trying to hide who he is. And at this point, the thing it is that he isn't is a prince. In fact, for much of the series, Sanji was the most elusive Straw Hat, and he maintained a lot of this mystique through the radically varied bounty posters, each depicting him in a highly stylized state. My favorite Sanji bounty will always be the hand-drawn one, and we actually know who was responsible for this. A world government photographer by the name of Attach was tasked with taking Sanji's photo, which he did, but he left the lens cap on the camera. And furthermore, Attach was promptly fired after Marineford due to his, quote, 57th instance of forgetting to remove the lens cap. And Attach now works directly for Big News Morgan, so we'll see if his self-imposed censorship continues. Sanji, however, has been a notorious victim of censorship elsewhere though, specifically through the 4Kids dub where they replaced his trademark cigarette with his now, ironically, trademark lollipop, which was actually referenced in chapter 831, where the crew encounter a mirror clone of Sanji holding his 4Kids lollipop. To be perfectly honest though, of all of the 4Kids censorship, I think that this is one of the better moves, because Sanji does have quite an intimate relationship with smoking, and over the course of One Piece we have identified that Sanji is a bit of a smoking polygamist, committing to 2 particular brands of cigarettes, one named King Ground and the other just flat out named Death, which I guess is like the equivalent of naming a soft drink diabetes. Strangely, there is a running theory that Sanji's cigarettes are cursed, because everyone who lights one of Sanji's cigarettes ends up dying. Ace lit one on Alabasta and then blah, he's dead. Pedro then lit one on Whole Cake Island and blah, now he is also dead, with the one and only saving grace being that God Enel unintentionally lit one of his cigarettes on Skypiea. However, Enel also died during that arc, but he was fortunate enough to have an ability to restart his own heart. So the Sanji curse is currently 3 for 3. Now our cook boy is not known for being aesthetically subtle, and one such element is Sanji's insanely detailed blingsome golden lighter. The shape of the lighter is actually a mermaid cradling her tail, which is a pose that would go on to be realized by Princess Shirahoshi. Also, this lighter actually exists and it's made by a French company called Dupont, which, judging by my terrible French, apparently means from the bridge, or of the bridge. I'm not sure which. I'm not good at French. And the process of how this happened is called defictionalization, which is when you take something that doesn't exist and bring it into reality. You should be careful if you want to try and buy one of these lighters though, because they are subject to a lot of counterfeiting. Dupont is sort of like the lighter equivalent of Rolex. Sanji himself does have quite a bit of unique merch though, such as when Shueisha even brought out a Sanji cookbook. It's called Pirate Recipes and it's a legitimately good book, filled with all sorts of fun, delicious recipes with a One Piece twist. Bigger twist now though, because in this video about Sanji, here is Zoro, and we're all familiar with his English translation fiasco transforming his name from Zoro into Zolo though. But did you know that the same thing happened with Sanji, but in French? In Frenchland, Sanji's name was originally dubbed as Sandy, which is how the French manga translated it for a while as well. Although they did eventually correct the name to Sanji, however, it wasn't until Le 67e tome. And while we're here, I guess we should also point out that Sanji himself is French. In fact, il est très français. Because Eiichiro Oda stated that Sanji would be from France in the real world, and most of his attack names are in French. Although post-time skip, a lot of his attacks have been named in English as well. Also, post-time skip, Sanji is a bit of a joke, and for good reason. Sanji is one of Oda's go-to comedy characters, and his trolling once went so far that he looked Sanji's voice actor dead in the eyes and said, "Sanji will never be cool again." That voice actor is Hiroaki Hirata, by the way, and he's quite the humor smith himself, often adopting Sanji's traits as his own. In fact, 1 year on Zoro's birthday, all of the voice actors delivered Zoro a special written message. However, Hirata's message was left completely blank and was held up with a comically displeased facial expression. Alright, really weird kind of mind-effing fact right now. Sanji and Chopper have the same voice actor, technically. Because Child Sanji is voiced by Ikue Otani, who we know better as Tony Chopper, or even much more better than that, we know her as Pikachu. And she also voices Konohamaru in Naruto, which is a very special series to Sanji, because Sanji's original name was actually Naruto, Datebayo. But after learning that there was another series starting soon actually called Naruto, Oda did the gentlemanly thing and changed his character's name. Although allegedly Naruto author Masashi Kishimoto was more than willing to change the name if Oda wanted to use it. But very much unable to escape his shinobi connection, Sanji was once featured on an episode of Death Battle where his opponent was Rock Lee of Naruto fame. The premise was something along the lines of Rock Lee disses Sanji's curry, which then immediately triggers a death battle where Sanji ultimately emerged victorious. Seems legit. But what seems a lot less legit is Sanji's favorite type of island in the Grand Line. In an SBS, Sanji answered that his favorite island was a, quote, Robin-chan on a Nami-san island, which caused Usopp to remark, "That's stupid, you're stupid." And in case you're wondering how it's possible for fictional characters to be interviewed, well, Oda actually does that a lot. When he gets asked a question, he often just lets the characters answer for him. Another example that appears quite commonly in the SBS segment is Sanji showcasing his superpower of being accurately able to assess a woman's bust, waist, and hip size based on visual alone. And Sanji has, on multiple occasions, publicly revealed Nami and Robin's sizes, and also Boa Hancock's on one occasion. He's sort of like a pacifista for perverts. A quality that would go on to be enhanced via the Chopper Man universe, where Dr. Usodabara produces a creature named Sanjirops, a cybernetic lizard who, quote, always insists that he's not a pervert, but always has perverted thoughts and does perverted things. So again, he's like a pacifista for perverts. Within the alternate universe continuity, Sanji has also appeared as a tentacle alien, a soccer player, and an elephant, to name just a few, with each of them maintaining Sanji's trademark qualities, all culminating in an existence known as Eroslime. Why is Sanji like this though? Well, there's actually a very popular theory that it's to do with his siblings. Ichiji, Niji, and the other one were all born without emotions, and the idea is that everything ended up inside of Sanji, so he feels everything 3 times as intensely, hence the uncontrollable lust. But the real question would be, is Sanji a bust man or a butt man? Except it isn't, because the real question is Sanji a leg man or a foot man? Because depending on the translation, it's quite difficult to discern. Sanji's epithet in One Piece is Kuroashi, with Kuro meaning black and Ashi meaning both leg and foot. And as a result, this causes some inconsistencies across English translations, and sometimes within the same company. For example, I believe that the Funimation subs use black foot, whereas the Funimation dub uses black leg. But Sanji's qualities have also been translated into entirely different manga series, most notably Shokugeki no Sanji, a series by Food Wars author Yuto Tsukuda, which takes the reader on a journey through One Piece via the lens of cooking. It's a surprisingly good series, and my favorite installment is Chapter 2, because that's the one where Sanji has to use, and this is a direct quote, he has to use Zoro's big boy sword to cut through a particularly big fish. But with a spin-off manga series, a cookbook, and very expensive DuPont merch, Sanji has become something of a fictional celebrity, and even has his own life-size statue in Oda's hometown of Kumamoto at the Mashiki Sports Park. And with such fame, Sanji even has his own in-world autograph, depicted here with a very exaggerated J and a curious kiss dotting the I, leading many to suspect that Sanji wears lipstick, which, to be fair, he did on at least one occasion during his time at Momoiro Island. But the truth is probably even more bizarre, because the ever so delicately planted kiss is done in the same substance as the ink. So what probably happens is that Sanji signs his name, then douses his lips in ink and applies the kiss. Curious, but it's far from the strangest thing that Sanji has ever done. one. As weirdly enough, Sanji currently holds the One Piece record for most amount of people to share his body. And no, I don't mean that in a sexual way, for a change. I mean that Sanji has literally had 3 people inhabit his body. There's Sanji himself, of course. However, during Punk Hazard, both Nami and Chopper took the Cookmobile for a spin, and while there were other body swaps, everyone else only had to deal with a single guest inside their fleshy vessels. But also, Sanji has something for the inside of your fleshy vessel, as due to his status as fictional chef, Sanji was heavily featured in the One Piece McDonald's collaboration for the special Tuts to Burger, a concept which I believe is actually trademarked by McDonald's, who made an ad recreating the famous Sanji Zeph Cook dynamic scene at the end of Whole Cake Island. A much less well-known dynamic, however, is the relationship between Sanji and Brook. It doesn't get showcased often, but Sanji identifies significantly with Brook. What with the whole being classical gentlemen with interests in very ungentlemanly pursuits. And Sanji has a similar dynamic with Frankie, actually. This one is showcased even less, but both of them are intensely emotional men who bear the label of pervert, albeit for different reasons. However, to cement their manly bond, Sanji even struck Frankie's trademark super pose on Punk Hazard, notably using Kinnamon's head to get the shape right. And these 3 actually form a trio within the crew. Sanji, Brook, and Frankie are often collectively referred to as the pervert trio by fans. Although again, these are the 2 crew members who Sanji has interacted with the least. Sanji even has a more fleshed out relationship with Jinbei, although I should say it's not a great one. Sanji has a one-sided beef with Jinbei, which is, it's a very long story, and I've made a whole video detailing just this single relationship, but it's a very fun Homer Simpson's Ned Flanders kind of dynamic, where Sanji is constantly annoyed at Jinbei, and Jinbei has zero awareness of what's going on at all. Despite these emotional outbursts though, Sanji is arguably the most intelligent member of the crew. He has a keen ability to always be able to see the bigger picture, and even using that to accurately predict the future and positioning himself perfectly as a result. Whereas other figures like Luffy and Zoro have too much tunnel vision, meanwhile members like Nami and Usopp have too many tears blocking their vision due to all of the fear that they're having, but Sanji is almost always reliable. Quite sturdy as well, mainly due to his genetic modifications, abilities that have always been active to some degree, but after donning the raid suit have been fully unlocked, and you can tell when Sanji is using his enhancements because his eyebrows flip to the opposite direction, which is weird, very weird, sort of way that he can like reconstruct his own face. But to be fair, it's not just his own face, because Sanji possesses one of the most bizarre and surreal techniques in the series, whereby through the power of assorted kick fighting, Sanji is capable of reconstructing a person's entire face, just as he did with Wanzi and Duval. Speaking of Duval though, there is a crazy connection here. As a child, Sanji was forced to wear an iron mask to conceal his identity, and as an adult, Duval chose to wear an iron mask to conceal his identity purely because he looked like Sanji. The world just seems to have something against showing Sanji's face, which is an absolute affront to the Okama, who love Sanji-chan's face, and throughout the series, Sanji has been something of an Okama magnet, beginning by clashing with Bon Clay on Alabasta and culminating with his quote training with Ivankov. And despite his very loud distaste for the experience, Sanji did learn at least one of Ivankov's attacks, which is the one where Ivankov launches at his opponent feet first, which Sanji went on to use against the Seraphim on Egghead Island. Sanji also has a fun variety of non-canon attacks as well, one of which is called Sexy Fire, which was showcased in Film Z. It essentially does the exact same thing that Hell Memories does, except Sexy Fire is born from positive feelings, those positive feelings being primarily Nami. Also, I have to point this out, but Sanji has one of my absolute favorite just dumb attack names in all of One Piece. So you know how Sanji can use moves like Blue Walk and Skywalk? Well, in Unlimited World Red, Sanji adds another of these to his arsenal, which is a fearsome attack called Ground Walk, which is just the most underwhelming name. I mean, I can use Ground Walk. Look, I'm doing it right now. And I guess it's one of those things that probably sounds a lot more impressive in Japanese. Sanji is considered to be quite impressive in Japanese, so much so that he makes surprise cameos in other series. The most iconic of which is undoubtedly Sayonara Zetsubo Sensei, where during class it is revealed that Meru has secretly been reading a yaoi doujinshi featuring the Sanji-Zoro pairing. Let's be real though, Sanji is a figure that has completely transcended Japanese media, and our Straw Hat Cook even made an appearance in the American animated series Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, a Marvel series produced by Disney, and thus meaning that Sanji is officially part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That's quite the shocking revelation, but nowhere near as shocking as this next one. At no stage in the series has Sanji ever been shown with both eyes revealed. One or the other has always been obscured by hair or hearts or something. There is but one single exception to this, one single and disturbing exception, as during the Alabasta anime, Toei made a bold decision to include this shot of Sanji with both eyes revealed, which to me just looks like a big old pile of fecal spaghetti. spaghetti, both hideous and confusing. You may also be confused as to why Sanji uses the word Mellerin from time to time, generally when simping over Nami. Because what does Mellerin even mean? Well, in Japanese, it means nothing, but in English, it means something. Mellerin is a low-cost imitation ice cream that was made in the United States as a product of necessity because butterfat was unable to be sourced. Now, as for why Sanji uses this to proclaim his love for Nami, well, this becomes a bit of a linguistic mess, but it serves as a combination of the word mero, meaning love, and the word tangerine, meaning tangerine. And I don't know if that provides you with more or less context, because sometimes Sanji's whims they're a bit incomprehensible, but other times they're as clear as glass noodles. For example, Sanji's philosophy on not harming women is so profound that in the Pirate Warriors game series, Sanji is literally programmed to be unable to attack female characters. And this is such a detriment that the developers had to add a warning box informing the players of female enemies if they select Sanji. We do have a bit of a slight problem though, because Sanji may have actually broken this rule. The Sanji conundrum goes as follows. Would Sanji harm a woman to save a woman? And in this case, we have a case study, and the answer may be yes. As when Big Mom attacked Reiju, Sanji blocked her attack with an attack, and then went on to tell Luffy not to fight because, quote, I'm doing it. Thus leaving us with 3 words. Sanji, fight, woman. And yes, you could argue that it was only a block, an attack used as a block. And to be fair, this is our only example of Sanji gray area in the series. However, he is subject to a flat-out continuity error though, as in chapter 464, Sanji reveals that he has read the Devil Fruit Encyclopedia. And that's a problem. Because in chapter number long time ago on Baratie, Zeph had to explain to Sanji how Devil Fruit uses functioned. Oh, and also Sanji made his famed claim on the 10th anniversary of One Piece. And I actually have this issue of Weekly Shonen Jump because Luffy has a nice gold hat. If we go through it, I bet we can find the exact spot. And here it is, Sanji claiming to have read the Devil Fruit Encyclopedia. And as a bit of a bonus, here is Absalom calling Sanji a pervert. Meanwhile, probably the most interesting thing about Sanji is that after 55, finding cool facts about Sanji gets very tricky. So much so that in a list of, quote, 100 mind-blowing facts about Vinsmoke Sanji, they had to resort to the following. Vinsmoke Sanji is a fictional character in the One Piece manga and anime series. Wow, mind blown. But that's 56 facts about Sanji that you may or may not have known. Sanji hates Jinbei, and it's for a surprisingly good reason. Ever since Jinbei was floated to the top of the fish tank as a Straw Hat candidate, each and every single crew member has loved the idea, with the sole exception of Sanji. The most hilarious thing is that Jinbei himself isn't really aware of this, as opposed to, say, Zoro, who actively engages in Sanji's comical anger, much like a toxic lemon versus a toxic avocado, and consuming them together will always lead to a big ol' storm. However, the best way to describe the Sanji-Jinbei dynamic is like Homer Simpson and Ned Flanders. Sanji hates Jinbei, but Jinbei is nothing but polite to Sanji, which in turn enrages him even more. But what is the origin of this very confusing relationship? Well, to discover that, we need to go back a long way. Along Park. That's where we're going. Because this relationship starts, as many do, with a friendly 69. A chapter 69 to be precise, which features Sanji, Luffy, and Yusaku on their way to Along Park after having just beaten the now almost certainly deceased Don Krieg. For the first, and I think only time in the series, Yusaku says something important. He introduces us to the concept of the 7 Warlords of the Sea, going on to name drop Jinbei and state that Arlong was once his equal. And fun fact, this is the scene that leads to the common misconception that Arlong was once a warlord, which is a very strange Mandela effect within the fanbase, where every now and then someone comes along and goes, wait, I thought Arlong was a warlord. And I think it's because Yusaku using the word equal may imply to some that Arlong used to be a warlord and therefore an equal to Jinbei. But I digress, because this is the seed of the Sanji-Jinbei dynamic. The logic here is that Jinbei released Arlong. Arlong then did the opposite of release by mentally and sometimes physically imprisoning Nami, thus leading to a very tragic and torturous childhood, the root cause of which being Jinbei's decision to release Arlong. So in Sanji's mind, Jinbei is directly responsible for Nami's suffering, which is then compounded by the fact that Nami is a woman because of Sanji's existing complex. I mean, that's not why Nami is a woman, but the fact that she is an extra thing for Sanji. When he was but a small Sanjling, the only kindness he received was from women, his mother Sora and his sister Reiju. It took meeting Zeph for Sanji to finally have a positive male influence in his life. So just like Fishman Island itself, this is surprisingly deep, because hurting a woman is the absolute worst thing you can do on the Sanji scale of morality. However, I'd also be lying if I said that breasts weren't part of this equation, because most of Sanji's more, how shall we say, aggressive dynamics tend to spawn directly from Nami. In fact, the very first time he almost got into a fight with Zoro also took place during Arlong Park, and this was because Zoro called Nami a quote, small fry, and Sanji, in his Sanji way, misinterpreted this as Zoro calling Nami's breasts small. And so a fight almost began, which was stopped by the face of Usopp. However, this is what began the Zoro-Sanji dynamic that we have today. And funnily enough, you won't see this in the Viz translation. They changed it because I think they were trying to stay away from too much titty talk, but you can still see the original scene play out in the subbed anime. With that said, this Jinbei situation is a lot more serious than the argument over chest sacks, and this is where things get a lot more complicated. It's hard to accurately convey this, but before Jinbei's introduction, the fan base expected him to be a big, scary antagonist guy, because that is how Yosaku portrayed him, this absurdly powerful and ruthless warlord. And to be fair to Yosaku, there is good reason for that, because Jinbei was originally supposed to be an antagonist. In his Viviacard databook entry, it stated that Oda's idea for Jinbei was to have him be a mafia-like underworld boss, controlling Arlong from the shadows, a role which would ultimately be more incorporated into the Doflamingo character. But Oda did not know that at the time. So everything said during Arlong Park was done with the intention of setting Jinbei up as a villain. And with that in mind, of course Sanji hates him, because that's exactly what was meant to happen. Now, the reason why this gets confusing is because a sketch does exist from One Piece Green Secret Pieces showing Oda's original designs for the Straw Hat crew, which includes a fishman who would become Jinbei. However, this character's name is Saigo, and all we really know about him is that Saigo was meant to be good friends with Zoro. But the Fishman Mafia boss and the Fishman Straw Hat crew member were supposed to be separate entities. However, as time went on, Oda fused them into the lovable whale shark who we now call Nakama. However, this creates a huge problem, because now Oda has to explain why his villain that he set up to be villainous and do bad things, Oda has to explain why he's not actually a villain and never did any bad things. Explaining how the Jinbei set up to be even worse than Arlong transformed into an honorable figure who forged a bond with Luffy during the Paramount War saga. And very importantly, Sanji was not there when this bond formed, so he's still operating on his initial impression from Arlong Park. And we would need to address this very immediately post-time skip, which is why our first meeting with Jinbei happens in a group including Luffy, Sanji, and Nami, because we need to solve this Arlong problem that we've created. And what we get here are two very powerful panels of Sanji stating, Jinbei, if you want to give us your explanation, we'll listen, but be warned. The home of our beautiful navigator Nami was destroyed by Arlong. She suffered terribly because of him. Based on what you say, I may never forgive you. Showing us that yes, in terms of physical cutting, Zoro is indeed superior, but Sanji is ruthless when it comes to cutting with words. So Jinbei then launches into the story of Fisher Tiger and Queen Otohime featuring Arlong, and as it turns out, Jinbei freed him because he wanted to stop the cycle of hatred and revenge as per Fisher Tiger's wishes. Was this a good move? No. Definitely not. And Arlong even says as much when he's all like, Jinbei, mate, I'm gonna go kill some humans because I'm incredibly racist. And look, if you want to stop that from happening, then you're going to have to kill me. But again, Jinbei doesn't do that because he wants to stop the cycle of hatred. Which, while well-intentioned, maybe, did immediately doom anyone who was going to cross Arlong's path. Like say a Nami, a Nojiko, or most tragically, a Belle Mare. And there are some attempts to plug this hole by saying that Arlong bribed officials so that word wouldn't get out that he was a bad man doing bad things. But at the same time, he had a 20 million berry bounty and was known all throughout East Blue as a very bad kill man. So I myself don't really buy that Jinbei never found out, but at the same time, it's a small thing and Oda was in a really tough spot. But you know what? Sanji doesn't buy it either. In fact, his response is one of the harshest things a character has ever said in One Piece. Alright, now kill yourself. It won't undo the crime, but at least Nami will feel a little better. Sanji literally did the internet edgelord kill yourself comment. And I want you all to remember this because it's going to be important later. Everything comes down to Nami, who I will point out did not forgive Jinbei because in her mind there was nothing to forgive. Nami is the one who decided to stop the cycle of hatred and revenge. Because sure, she's had a horrific life and arguably due to Jinbei's actions, but Jinbei didn't mean for that to happen. Well, more accurately, Oda later decided that Jinbei didn't mean for that to happen. But still, Nami was surprisingly chill about this. And at the climax of the arc, we have a symbolic moment of growth as Sanji and Jinbei team up to fight against Wadatsumi, a combination of human and fishman as well as fire and water. All sorts of symbolic wankery and generally poetic goodness. But even then, Sanji didn't move on quite as quickly as Nami. And when Jinbei was asked to join the crew, Sanji is the only Straw Hat who is not smiling. Instead, he's giving an excuse for Jinbei's absence, being all like, guys, wait a second. Look, Jinbei's an important man with important Jinbei things to do. He surely doesn't have the time to join us ever. So it's a complicated dynamic. Sanji sort of begrudgingly accepts Jinbei, but only because Luffy and Nami do. So as a result, there's still that nagging hint of resentment. And you'd think that this might be explored a bit further in Whole Cake Island, but absolutely nothing of note for the relationship happens here. Sanji and Jinbei, for the most part, are physically separated for the vast majority of the arc. Also, to be fair, Sanji has much more important things to be thinking about at the time. The whole crisis of family, the crisis of self, the crisis of Chef with the wedding cake. So in this deep dark moment, even the presence of Jinbei is a positive. But the uncomfortable dynamic would resume during Wano. When Jinbei returns completely out of nowhere, with no explanation for exactly how he knew when and where the raid would commence, again Sanji shows a less than impressed reaction, being more shocked by the appearance of Jinbei than anything else. However, I think that part of this shock can be attributed by all of the female attention that Jinbei is receiving. You know, he's getting a hug from Nami on one side, Carrot on the other. So I do think that's triggered some Sanji jealousy. Jinbei also goes on to form a fun parental duo with Robin, and the two of them get along quite well, which starts a trend of Jinbei having healthy and fun relationships with every woman that Sanji seems to be interested in. And we get a fun hint of Sanji's animosity when they're both helping Luffy get up to the roof. Jinbei appears heroically and Sanji's furious, and he just states, "Who put you in charge? I'm the one dragging Luffy along." And if this was Zoro, he would argue back. He'd say something like, "No, shitty cook, it is I, Sword Man, who will help Luffy." But because it's sweet Jinbei, he just politely apologizes, having no real concept of why Sanji is so angry, and just trying to diffuse the situation like the accomplished diplomat he is. Although Wano also introduces another problem, which is that Jinbei threatens Sanji's position within the crew. After the raid, Jinbei officially becomes the third most valuable in the crew according to bounties, thus knocking Sanji out of the monster trio and into fourth place, something he is painfully aware of as he despairs on the floor. However, I will say that at no point in the series has Sanji ever had a higher bounty than Jinbei. Even previously, when Sanji was above Zoro at 330 million berries, Jinbei was still an order of magnitude more with 438 million berries. And I suppose if you want to consider it like this, Jinbei was at one point the second most valuable Straw Hat. And I guess there was also a time when Zoro was in fourth place. But here's the thing. Everything about Jinbei seems almost intentionally designed to cause conflict with Sanji. And you can see everything playing out right now on Egghead Island. Sanji and Jinbei are the only two crew members who got Hawaiian shirt outfits, so Jinbei is again encroaching on Sanji's territory. Oh, and also let me know in the comments who wore it better, Sanji or Jinbei, because I honestly think it's Jinbei. Hawaiian shirts are just more flattering for the more rotund of society. But we also have some awkwardness when Sanji volunteers to join Stussy and Jinbei tags along. Sanji wanted to go with Stussy alone, and then Jinbei's just there all of a sudden. In Sanji's mind, Jinbei is being a very, very annoying third wheel. And again, Jinbei hilariously has no concept of this. And now that Sanji has left them alone, I would expect him to eventually become jealous of the inevitably positive relationship that forms between Jinbei and Stussy, because Jinbei is just a generally likable guy. And, as previously stated, easily forms very positive dynamics with every woman that Sanji covets. But the big thing here is the fight against S-Shark. I think a lot of people were very surprised at just how ready and willing Sanji was to kick the crap out of child Jinbei, but it all makes sense. Sanji's distaste towards Jinbei comes from the impression that Jinbei's actions hurt Nami, and now Jinbei's clone is physically threatening to hurt Nami. So this is the opportunity that Sanji has been waiting for, the chance to take out all of that pent-up aggression towards Jinbei with the very telling line of, "I don't care if you're a kid or Jinbei. You get the death penalty, Jinbei Jr.," which is a callback to Fishman Island when Sanji told Jinbei to kill himself for the crime of hurting Nami. So it all comes together. Particularly with Sanji labeling S-Shark as Jinbei Jr. He doesn't see S-Shark as its own entity. In fact, he's using S-Shark as a substitute for Jinbei and all of the issues that we've been laying down since the days of Arlong Park. It is a stupidly well-crafted relationship, one that is very missable because it gets built up so sparingly and over such a long time that it's easy to forget the few interactions they've had, and even easier to forget Sanji's first exposure to the very concept of Jinbei during Arlong Park. And all I can really say is poor Jinbei. He is an unwilling and unknowing participant in Sanji's increasingly tangled delusions, which is just one of the many amazing subtle crew dynamics meticulously implemented by Eiichiro Oda. Vinsmoke Judge did a bad thing. He did that bad thing to Sanji, as well as Red Sanji, Blue Sanji, and even Onion Head Sanji. Pictured here being completely uncertain as to why he exists. Good on him to join the rest of us, I suppose. But it's not what you think. Together, these Sanji plural have no idea what the full extent of Judge's madness was, as well as the hidden secret that lies within Sanji himself. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece. My name is Liam and my genetic augmentations include the ability to walk into any room and forget why I did that. Science was not kind to me, and arguably it wasn't kind to the Vinsmoke siblings either, but at least they received all sorts of funky powers in exchange for each and every drop of their humanity. But here is the question, how did Judge make said powers? And here is the answer, vaguely defined science. But it involves a multitude of factors, some of which we're only just discovering right now in the manga. This wasn't just Judge opening up the genetic equivalent of a bag of Alan's party mix. No, he very specifically chose these powers, and each and every one of them were taken from a character in the series that we have met. And in particular, there is something extremely special about that there boy Sanji, and the only one in the world who knows about it is Judge. And me, Judge and me. And soon, you, which would make it Judge and me and you. But first, this video has been invaded by a wild dog flamingo. He says foo foo foo, and is threatening to destroy the channel unless he receives a bounty of 1,000 pats. Thankfully, for every person who subscribes as a result of this video, Dog Flamingo will receive 1 pat. So hit that wonderful button and I shall deliver this evil yet adorable boy a pat. Oh, and you'll also receive consistent injections of One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feed. And please do say hi in the comments below if you are a new member of the Grand Fleet. Welcome. Alright, to kickstart this whole endeavor thing, we first need to establish that the Germa powers, by which I mean the biological augmentations of the Vinsmoke children, are not in fact Judge's creation. The Germa kingdom itself has existed for at least 300 years in the One Piece world and 0 years in the real world because it's fictional. However, did you know that even in the fake world of One Piece, the Germa kingdom is still fictional? They are the primary antagonists of an in-world comic titled Sora, Warrior of the Sea, which is about a young marine named Sora who fights against all sorts of evil with his smack-talking robot and trusty seagull. But the weird thing is, this comic mimics the actual Germa kingdom almost perfectly. And that's weird because the comic existed long before our current Vinsmokes did. In the One Piece world, every character from North Blue recognizes the Germa as a result of this comic, which includes well-known figures such as Straw Man, Dino Dude, and also significantly less well-known figures such as Vito from the Fire Tank Pirates, who is only known for 2 things, those things being gun and tongue, which sounds like quite the erotic mafia novella. But Vito claims to have read the Sora comic as a child, which is intriguing because he is currently 36 age units old, which is a whopping 15 years older than Sanji, and by extension Ichiji, Niji, and the other one, which I go to such great lengths to point out because I want you to understand exactly what Judge has done here. He has engineered his children in an attempt to replicate the villains from the Sora comic, kind of like a genetic cosplay. But the strangest part is that Judge also chose to marry a woman named Sora, which is the same name as the protagonist in the comic, and it's weird. It's almost as if Judge is the ultimate fanboy, tying his very existence to the fiction within fiction that is Sora, Warrior of the Sea, which is the one place where I greatly identify with Judge, having based this whole stretch of my life on One Piece and all. And if I could genetically engineer a brood of small Zoros, Zamis, and Zoni Zoppas, then I absolutely would. However, Judge actually had the means to bring his fantasy into reality, which leads to our first conclusion being that Judge created the Germa powers via extracting DNA from devil fruit users. I mean, I say DNA, this actually does have an in-world term, which is either the lineage factor or bloodline elements, depending on your translation. It doesn't matter, it's all just DNA. And this isn't particularly far-fetched because we have a confirmed example of this happening in the series before. The elusive Dr. Vegapunk was credited as having replicated the powers of Kizaru's Pika Pika no Mi in order to create the laser weaponry of the Pacifista, as well as serial Bunglenut Caesar Clown even having cracked the genetic code for creating the Zoan fruit we have at home in the Smile fruits. So genetic modification spawning from the study of fictional fruit isn't exactly unheard of. In fact, you just heard it. But how does this impact the Vinsmokes? Well, Reiju's poison pink prowess is something that could be achievable by studying Magellan's poison generation and manipulation. But just to clarify, because we always need to clarify, clarity is important, but Reiju is not a devil fruit user. She was identified as a fruit user in an issue of One Piece magazine, but that was later retconned by the Viviacard databook. So her ability to suck with 2 C's is indeed a genetic modification. Meanwhile, Ichiji's sparkling red is another power that could spawn directly from the study of Kizaru's fruit. Niji finds his electric answer in the Gorogoro Goronomi, Sanji can be assigned the classic Meromeronomi, although his original Stealth Black can also be explained with the Suke-Suke-nomi. And as for Yonji, Yonji doesn't really have a special ability. His powers essentially consist of extending his right hand with cybernetic enhancements. That's it. We don't even know if he can do it with his left, just his right. And yet somehow Sanji is still considered to be the disappointing sibling in this bunch, which I think Yonji realized as a child, because this is definitely the face of, holy crap, I am so lucky this isn't me being beat up. I'm just gonna say it. Yonji sucks. With the whole devil fruit aspect, what adds more credence to this idea is that Judge was a close colleague of Vegapunk. In fact, the two of them discovered DNA as part of the same research team. So Judge is fully capable of examining the DNA of fruit users and attempting to replicate it within his own DNA, which was then inserted into his wife's DNA, and that just made a big old curly-browed mess. To state the counterpoint though, devil fruits, they're an easy answer to just about any question in One Piece. Especially this question, because there are so many powers at this point that it's really not difficult to find a fruit that acts in the same way as each of the individual Germa abilities. And that's why we have another solution. Magical fruit is great and all, but this is a world where magical powers exist sans fruit. Sans being the Latin word meaning without, and pretentious being the English word meaning guy on the internet who uses the Latin word sans. However, there are many species within the world capable of replicating Germa abilities quite naturally, such as the minx with Electro. At face value, Niji's Dengeki Blue is almost indistinguishable from this technique. In fact, the only real difference is that Niji doesn't have to don his fursuit to use it, and thus he can keep his persona under wraps. And as for Sanji, here's a bit of a spoiler warning here for anime-only watchers. If you don't like that kind of thing, then please do head to this time, wherever it is. But for everyone else, here is why Sanji is such a special boy. We have, of course, recently been introduced to the existence of Lunarians, who do the exact same thing as minks, just with wings and fire instead of fur and electricity. In fact, to this point, Queen even had a rather curious line in the manga upon encountering Sanji, which was, "Does a human burn like that? I know you ain't a Lunarian," which in terms of writing a narrative, this can be seen as pretty heavy foreshadowing for some kind of connection here. And speaking of, Sanji's mother Sora. In Japanese, Sora literally means sky. So this isn't just a one-off connection, as Sanji was quite literally splooted out of the dank birth gate of the sky. Although again, this explanation has its problems. Mostly because currently we do lack species for Reiju and Ichiji to take their powers from, and stumbling across a Lunarian may have been nigh on impossible for Judge. However, then again, King was experimented on during his imprisonment on Punk Hazard, which is the place where Vegapunk worked, and Vegapunk is the dude who Judge worked with. So it does take a few degrees of speculation, but Judge acquiring Lunarian DNA is far from impossible. But weirdly enough, we do also have a third explanation. One that was given to us by Queen actually, who had a very curious line when referring to the Vinsmoke siblings during the raid. He goes, "Mwahaha, Judge's son. I hear all of you kids are cyborgs. Is that burning leg of yours a machine part?" Which I really don't think many of us quite appreciated at the time, but this is a really odd thing to say. Queen seems genuinely convinced that the Vinsmoke children are more mechanically than biologically engineered. And to be fair, remember our disappointing friend Yonji? Well, his winch powers are clearly cybernetic in nature. Meanwhile, with Ichiji, we know for a fact that cyborgs can replicate a form of his sparkling red, not only with the Pacifista, but also with Frankie for that matter. And with Niji, well, electricity is important for cyborgs, I think. But this is also where we need to explore something a little bit different, which are the more universal Vinsmoke powers. In addition to their individual specialities, each Vinsmoke sibling was granted basic superhuman abilities, such as the defensive exoskeleton. In fact, in chapter 883, when Child Sanji punched Ichiji, it even made a bit of a gank, which is a metallic sound effect. And of course, when Yonji was put in his place by Sanji, he essentially needed his face panel beaten back into place like a car. I think that Queen was on the money here. The Vinsmoke siblings are cyborgs, just not cyborgs as we know them. Cyborgs in One Piece are traditionally big, clunky hunks of perverted speedo-wearing machinery, but what the Vinsmoke siblings display is more akin to something along the lines of nanomachines. Teeny tiny robo things, the size of 1/1,000,000th of a meter, which could very much be responsible for the enhanced strength, speed, durability, and recovery of the Vinsmoke siblings. And this is what Judge knows that nobody else does. Sanji is a cyborg. He His body, along with the bodies of the rest of the Power Rangers, were flooded with nanomachines only Sanji's failed to activate thanks to his mother's cocktail of miscellaneous drug things, which could explain the, how shall we say, sudden changes that occur as a result of the raid suit. Because it's not necessarily purely biological, this is machines talking to one another. And Judge isn't exactly a novice with machine-based science either, given that he was the architect of the raid suits. Or was he? That's another one of those weird things. Because in the Sora comic strip, the Germa are wearing what appear to be raid suits, so they may very well have been invented prior to Judge's reign. That or Judge, like every other decision this man has made in his life, decided to imitate the comic. You know what's weirder though? The fact that every raid suit has pretty much the same design with the exception of Reiju. I mean, I can just imagine the meeting that Judge must have had with one of his engineers on this one. Alright, Your Highness, so that's 5 raid suits, each consisting of long pants, long sleeves, and a cape. Well, actually, make that 4 raid suits. I have a special design in mind for Reiju. Oh, absolutely, Your Highness, let's hear it. So here's the concept, right? We are going to push the boundaries of science by giving her the shortest skirt that science will allow. Primarily because I plan on tattooing both of her upper thighs with the number 6. Nothing weird. It's not like I want to see her succulently modified legs. It's more of a branding thing. Oh, absolutely, sire. If you're not branding, then you're not landing. I'll make that change right away. Also, we're going to need to see her cleavage. Lots and lots of cleavage. As much as scientifically possible, really, for science. Yep, I'll add in some science cleavage. And let's also put some swirly stuff on her chest. Something to really emphasize her nipples, you know? Makes sense. I'll add in 1 order of science nipples as well. And the belly button. We really, and I cannot emphasize this enough, we need to see that belly button. So is that going to be like a branding belly button or a science belly button? Neither. This is something for Daddy Judge. Judge is like the antithesis of the father who does the old, "You are not going out dressed like that." Instead, he's more like, "You are not going out dressed." But back to reasonable things, cyborgs. This really is just speculation based on the words of an obese dinosaur. But I actually think that of the 3, Devil Fruit, Species, and Cyborgs, weirdly enough, Cyborgs is currently the one that fits best. Of course, it could also be a mixture of any 2 or even all 3. For example, Ichiji could be a modified light human, Niji could have some mink up his DNA butt, and Yonji could be a purely mechanical ass clown. But no matter what the answer is, it holds fascinating implications for Sanji. Because his abilities either spawn directly from a devil fruit used by both of Luffy's brothers, a long-forgotten race of BDSM enthusiasts, or he's just a flat-out cyborg. But as for you, well, you're still just a squishy old human. Your Honor, my client Vinsmoke Sanji has been baselessly accused of heinous, humiliating, and ever so horny crimes. And I, man on the internet, am here today to set the record straight. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you will each hear and weigh the evidence, coming to a very twirly conclusion supported by said evidence, and you will find my client innocent. So let us commence the trial of Vinsmoke Sanji. Because there's a certain perception of Sanji in the online One Piece fan base, at least, one that I have fallen victim to myself on occasion, which is that Sanji is bad with women. And I don't think this is true. So we are going to call to the stand every woman that Sanji has attempted to flirt with throughout the series, and that of course raises the question of how many women has Sanji flirted with and or simped for? Lots is probably lots. That's like asking Dio's question of how many breads have you eaten in your life? But this impression of Sanji is actually both incorrect and out of his control. And let's begin with witness number the first being Moody, Full Body's date to Baratie, and she serves as the audience perspective of our very first encounter with Sanji. And Sanji was very forward with Moody, even inviting her to quote sample his private stock, which, you know, doesn't mean taste some wine or doesn't mean oral sex. And either way, Moody's pretty into it, and I'm definitely calling this a success for Sanji, with special points awarded because Moody was on a date with someone else at the time. And what this shows is a bit of a pattern that we'll see across Sanji's, I don't want to call it dating, but, you know, women interacting career, which is that he is incredibly suave when talking about food and dining. This is his home field, and you can tell because Moody was not a one-off aberration. In the very next chapter, Sanji is seen hitting on another woman on a date to a successful degree as well, much to her date's frustration, and in the chapter after that, he's seen simping over a woman named Roxanne, who is genuinely happy to see him. And I have to say, this is going real well. This dude has now rizzed 3 women in 3 back-to-back chapters. And whilst not strictly speaking in the Baratie arc, during Whole Cake Island, there is a flashback flashback to Baratier, where it becomes evident that Sanji has been this way ever since he was a child, charming a fourth woman by clumsily dropping her dish at the sight of her sheer beauty. So where does this impression of Sanji's overwhelming failure come from? Well, a big part of that is going to be Nami. As soon as Sanji sees Nami, he goes completely whack job overboard for her in a way that he hadn't for the previously discussed four women, and also in a way that he doesn't for most women going forward. Sanji gets particularly dumb around Nami, and Nami takes great advantage of this. And this is the first of many Sanji failures with Nami specifically. And what that does, right, is it forms an illusion of quantity. Sanji has struck out with Nami more times than he's encountered other women on his journey. And what that does is produce the illusion that Sanji is a perpetual failure with women in general. However, in fictional reality, what we do, right, we look at Baratier, and Sanji has an 80% success rate if you count by individual women rather than individual attempt. And we'll talk more about why Nami is immune from Sanji in a bit, because this is a very special rule that Oda has for writing One Piece. But we should also add up the rest of East Blue, because Nojiko is also exempt from any Sanji simpy sorcery, as Sanji had the predictable reaction to Nojiko, after which point she politely asked him to leave, and later on he also tries and fails to sneak a hug from Nojiko under the guise of victory celebrations. But here Sanji is hard countered by the existence of Genzo. However, during the post-Arlong celebrations, Sanji claims that he's gonna go, quote, find a girl. And to be completely fair to Sanji, we don't know how this turned out. We just cut from the celebrations to the very next day, and that's that. And during Logtown, Sanji does have a moment where we see Alvida, but there's no interaction, so we can't really count that for anything, which is very lucky on Sanji's part, mind you, because Alvida very much appreciates Sanji's style of devotion and worship, and almost certainly would have made him her slave, because Sanji has a very can-do attitude when it comes to these sorts of relationships. And another example of this later on in the series is when Sanji constructs his mental image of Big Mom and arousedly asks, what happens to those bad cooks if they're late with her sweets? But all in all, Sanji actually entered the series incredibly strong. Of the 6 East Blue women that Sanji directly flirted with, he saw success with 4 of them. And that is a 66.6% success rate. Which takes us into the Grand Line and a new era of Sanji with the introduction of Vivi and subsequent joining of Nico Robin, both of whom are going to be added to Sanji's total, just not in the column he would like. And it needs to be noted that Sanji's reaction to Robin joining the crew is almost exactly the same as when he first met Nami. Sanji slips into this very poetic stage mode and does what he does best by serving her delicious food and drink. And this mirror is here because of one of Oda's writing rules, which is that there is to be no romance within the Straw Hat Pirates, an edict so ironclad that it's one of the only strict conditions that Oda gave to Netflix for producing the live-action series. So that's why Robin very much strolls in a very similar Nami-esque manner. But for most crew members, this rule is unnoticeable and irrelevant. However, it has a pretty massive effect on Sanji. With the Straw Hat rule, Nami, Robin, and Vivi all have to be narratively immune, which is unfortunate for him because these are the 3 women that Sanji spends the most time around, and so it gives the illusion that he's unsuccessful in general because he's failing with these same mostly 2 women over and over and over again for the past almost 3 decades. But keep the following in mind, even with all of that, at this stage, Sanji's current win-loss ratio is 4-4, perfectly balanced as all things should be, because Alabasta Sanji was, I think, the most balanced incarnation of Sanji, as he had the perfect combination of simp and chivalry that I will refer to as simplery. And in modern One Piece, when anyone complains about Sanji, chances are it's because that balance is off. Because there was an event that happened at a certain point in One Piece, an event that happened off-page, mind you. This was during production, a behind-the-scenes change to One Piece that really threw Sanji off balance. But first, Alabasta era Sanji was smack bang perfect. For example, on Little Garden, Sanji gawks at a shirtless Nami, but then immediately gives her his suit jacket to wear. Very simp, very chivalry, very simplery. And even the fight against Bon Clay demonstrates this because Sanji is so willing and eager to see Nami's body, but he also can't bring himself to hit Bon Clay in Nami's form, even though he knows it isn't Nami. And when it comes to Vivi, yes, Sanji does have his moments of trying to look at her in the bath, and he goes a bit wild for her in that dancing girl outfit, but this is always balanced out by his dedication and reliability. In fact, Sanji has a lot less simpy moments with Vivi than I thought I remembered, because with a couple of exceptions, he's usually pretty normal around her and actually leans a lot more on the knight in shining armor idea. Lines like, I'm sorry I missed all the action, but I'll have other chances to show my stuff. Never fear, the sleeping knight has awakened and guarantees your safety. Lines like that are a good representation of the average Vivi-Sanji interaction. But again, the perfect Sanji is a balanced Sanji. It keeps him interesting because whenever Sanji's on page, you're never quite sure which one you're gonna get. He could be about to pull off an iconically cool series moment, one that gets seared into our minds forever, or he could just be about to do something stupid and highly embarrassing. But it's those latter moments that enhance the awesome ones because you don't expect the awesome ones. They come out of nowhere and they whack you in your face. But this is also the beginning of Sanji being a bit less successful in the fictional dating realm. On Skypiea, Sanji gives Konos his best shot with the love is a dilemma, falling for a fallen angel bento box, but this shot ultimately misses. Then on Long Ring Longland, Sanji almost sees some success with his preferred choice of crew member, Gina, the sexy carpenter. However, this decision was overruled by Luffy in favor of taking Foxy's Jolly Roger. So he won't count that one because we don't know how it would have worked out. And really, our next candidate after that is Caliphar, which is a crazy thought, but Water 7 Sanji was actually very much toned down compared to every other saga. It was a much more serious story and there wasn't a huge amount of opportunity for Sanji to strike. And then, when he finally got one, he got struck in the nuts because Caliphar was always, she was always going to be a bit of a rough ask, and she directly challenged Sanji's ideology by saying, "You don't need to think of me as a woman. The world we live in is not so gentle," which eventually prompts the famous line, "Even if it kills me, I won't kick a woman." And this is where Nami becomes authentically impressed by Sanji's chivalry for the first time in the series. Still, it is a loss to Caliphar. However, on Thriller Bark, Sanji, along with every male Straw Hat member, actually got a marriage proposal from Lola, so we're definitely counting that as a win, even if Sanji wasn't looking for it. But then Sabadi Archipelago brought us Kami, who Sanji was love-struck by at first sight, and part of this was primed on Thriller Bark due to the idea that, and I quote, "mermaids don't wear panties." But Kami, she's another Konos, someone who seems almost completely unaware of anything that Sanji's doing. Which brings us to Sanji's total pre-time skip win-loss ratio, and that is 5 wins to 7 losses, which, that's still a solid 40%-ish. Yes, it is going down over time, but who among you watching would not do terrible, terrible things for a 40% hit rate? But here's where things get a bit complicated, and why pre- and post-time skip can arguably be considered different characters. And this is all because of a man named Akira Jean-Baptiste Hattori, who we've covered before on this channel, but he was the editor of One Piece from Sabadi to Fishman Island. And here is how Oda describes his relationship with this particular editor. "Sometimes the manga can evolve to reflect the editor's skin. So when I drew something with a little extra skin, Hattori really liked that. I was like, ooh, that worked. So maybe I got a little carried away with the fan service. That wasn't my intention. So if I'm done, I'll say that he was the editor that likes women." And Hattori has probably had one of the single biggest individual influences on One Piece aside from Oda himself. Hattori is often credited with unlocking Oda's hidden pervy potential, which immediately manifested during Amazon Lily when Sweet Pea mistook Luffy's man parts for a mushroom, and in fact during that arc, every resident of Amazon Lily was obsessed with Luffy's man-shroom. But this had a huge knock-on effect for Sanji, and it's almost certainly why we had stuff like the nosebleed plotline for post-time skip. Because post-time skip Sanji became a bit of a parody of pre-time skip Sanji. What was once a pretty well-balanced quality of simplery suddenly weighed way more in the direction of the pervy gags because Oda had been unleashed, and because Sanji had become a lot more overtly perverted, the only way to maintain some sort of balance would be that he also needed to be punished for this behavior and become less successful with women. Which you can see perfectly in his reintroduction where he steps back onto Sabadi and yells, "Gimme them ladies!" And this is a perfect illustration because Sanji used to do so well with miscellaneous background women, and here he is just completely bombing. And by the way, there are 6 women that I count running away from him here. We are going to add to his unfortunate total. In addition to sniffing the posterior of Perona and being turned to stone by the mere sight of Boa Hancock, as well as Shirahoshi later on, giving us 9 failures within a single saga, skewing us to an unfortunate ratio of 5 to 16. And look, Hattori was only the beginning, because once he raised the bar in this area, every editor then went on to meet it. In fact, it's almost as if it's become essential criteria for the job. For example, editor Naito once commented about having a child with Carrot and how this sort of diversity should be accepted in the modern world. These are the kind of people who have a pretty ridiculously strong influence on the shape of One Piece. It's not just a one-man Oda show. And I actually have a video about all of the times where editors have had a massive impact on the series, for better or worse, which you should absolutely check out after finishing this one, because now I have a very surprising conclusion about Sanji coming up soon. But first, to be fair, the next few arcs did initiate a bit of a course correction. Fishman Island did go a bit overboard, and so what happened is that Sanji got some of his chivalry back. They didn't tone down the pervert factor, they just reintroduced the knight persona. A great example of this is when he saved Tashigi on Punk Hazard, saying, "I heard the sound of a lady's teardrops falling," which is a line that goes so much harder than it has any right to, although Tashigi herself still had zero interest whatsoever. Not a problem though, because a lot of other women would be struck by that Sanji charm. Monet is a minor example. Sanji asks who the hottie in the back is, and Monet takes this compliment very well. But I think the first example of post-time skip Sanji redemption is Viola, because this interaction establishes a formula that still gets used to this very day, which is that Sanji simps for a woman who wants to kill him, but Sanji breaks his way into her heart with one genuinely touching sentence, and in Viola's case, that sentence was, "A million people might curse your name, but I will never doubt a woman's tears." After which point, Viola's impression of Sanji instantly flipped. She then betrayed the Don Quixote family and said, "You really are a hopeless man, but thank you. You lifted my heart." And later on, she also repeats that line whilst blushing. Of course, the big shame here is that Sanji had to leave Dressrosa immediately after this interaction, and they haven't seen each other since. If they had more time together, it may have turned out like Sanji's almost wife Charlotte Pudding, who also perfectly adhered to this formula of wanting to kill Sanji, but being flipped by a single genuine sentence. And in the case of Pudding, it was Sanji being breathtaken by her third eye, after which point Pudding completely fell in love with him to the same sort of wacky over-the-top degree that Sanji usually falls for other women. And also, one interaction that a lot of people tend to forget is with Sanji and Cosette. Cosette was the head chef of the Germa kitchen, who Sanji protected and praised the cooking of, which resulted in Cosette having a bit of a love moment for this here prince man. And this is a streak that continued well into Wano, particularly with Some, the geisha whose pet mouse that Sanji rescued in the fight against Queen. And after this point, Some became infatuated with Sanji, which he somehow didn't notice, but Some now works at a soba store because of Sanji and how much she loved om-nom-nomming his soba. So for a man that the internet repeatedly tells me is a complete failure with women, he certainly does have a whole lot of them completely falling for him after very quick interactions. At least one per arc starting in Dressrosa. And yes, Wano and Beyond have also brought us a string of failures as well. There's Yamato, Black Maria, Stussy, Lilith, York, and Hiyori, the latter of which hit Sanji particularly hard because she chose Zoro over him. Not that that's the first time that that's happened. From Sanji's perspective, Hiyori, Tashigi, and Perona have all expressed interest in Zoro over him. And that's probably why Sanji gets a little extra angry at post-time skip Zoro, because sometimes it must feel like he's living his own NTR story where everyone he's interested in is relentlessly getting mossed. But even then, with all of that, this brings Sanji to a total win-loss ratio of 9-23, which is still a wild 28% successful. But I am about to blow you away with statistics, because there's also some Sanji incidents that we haven't accounted for, such as every time a group of enemies have seduced Sanji for their own nefarious purposes. This includes the 20 Whiskey Peak bounty huntresses, as well as the one man in the far left of the panel, and also the 4 Foxy Pirate members who prompted Sanji to say, "Maybe I should just let you Davy back me." And I don't know, maybe that's a euphemism, but also all of Black Maria's subordinates were on the verge of legitimately falling for Sanji. Now, all of these situations, they had ulterior motives, but POV, you're Sanji, right? You're probably gonna count it all as a dub regardless. But even if you don't, every mermaid on Fishman Island seemed to like Sanji, and at first I thought that they were oblivious to his actions. However, during the Hody Jones defeat party, we see Sanji and Brook with mermaids, and one of them is actually kissing Brook. So the mermaids genuinely like Sanji, and they were even pleading with him not to forget them and to come visit again, which is also an effect present on Wano. Sanji was very popular with the women of Wano in general. Ladies were literally lining up to taste his noodle. And of course, we also can't forget that all of the Kamabaka Kingdom fell in love with Sanji as well. These are entire civilizations falling for Sanji as if he's some sort of Cavendish. And at this point, the ratio doesn't even matter anymore, because the population of mermaids, Wano citizens, and Okama is so large that the ratio is something like 99.9999969% in Sanji's favor, which tells me that Sanji is doing pretty well. And I think that the impression of his failure definitely comes from the Straw Hat interactions, as well as the no crew romance rule, plus the enhanced Hattori era pervert humor that is still carried over to this very day. And also, something I haven't haven't gone into too much, which is anime filler, movies, and other extended media. So the issue with filler is that it's fundamentally not allowed to change whatever the status quo at the time is. So often writers have to default to using older gags. And Sanji's well-worn gag with Nami and Robin and Vivi is to try and fail with women. And that same interaction plays out with a lot of the filler characters. So if you look at the body of One Piece as a franchise, I can definitely see how it comes across, especially when the anime adds stuff to canon material as well, like Sanji actually becoming a dog for Stussy. But the truth of the matter is that Sanji is doing just fine and could realistically retire on any post-time skip island of his choosing and live out the rest of his days in his own personal heaven. I want to know what would happen if Sanji's chivalry was turned into chivalry. How does Sanji get through One Piece if he cannot kick men? I can tell you right now that this is going to be a wild journey because this is not a simple character change. So much of what Sanji is his core beliefs regarding women. And you know, there's actually several points in One Piece where Sanji faces life or death situations that all hinge on a pervert gag. But for this video, we have two simple rules. The first is that Sanji's characteristics are going to be flipped, meaning that not only can he not fight men, but he also simps over men in the same way that he normally does with women. However, rule number two is that there is going to be no romance, because that's Oda's rule for writing the One Piece universe. He can simp all he wants, but just as always, it's not going to get him anywhere. And how we make this shift is fairly simple, because Sanji's chivalry is a two-part formula. One core tenet of Sanji's belief stems from the fact that as a child, the only people in the world who were kind to him were women. So what we do right is we flip that. Vinsmoke Sora is now the maniacal dictator of the Gemma Kingdom, with Vinsmoke Judge being the kind, loving parent who sadly passed away. Reiju is the heartless sibling, whilst Ichiji, Niji, and the other one are all very empathetic and nurturing. I'm not going to try and justify it too deeply beyond that. We just require a semi-logical premise to get things going. But with one final requirement being that we need to gender swap Zeph. In this timeline, Zeph is going to encounter Emporio Ivankov, complications arise, ensue, and now Zeph has breasts. Say hello to Red Breast Zeph, which I think is a much more appropriate rebranding because Zeph is about to lose her leg. And so Sanji's childhood happens as follows. He is imprisoned by his mother for being not an evil prick, then released into the wild by his ever so kind brothers, gets a job on a cruise ship, loses his job and takes up a career of starving on a rock, which doesn't go well. So he and Zeph found Baratie together, with Red Breast Zeph then training Sanji in the art of kick fighting. And this right here, this is part 2. Zeph was the one who taught Sanji that a man can't kick a woman. And Zeph has changed her tune now that she is a woman, so we don't have that to worry about. But at some stage, Sanji is going to develop his chivalry, taking a vow to never kick a man. Cut to the iconic introduction of Sanji on Baratie. Here we have Full Body trying to impress his lady friend, whose name is Moody, who for some reason we see in a bikini in One Piece Stampede. So here's the thing. Full Body is completely talking out of his ass here. He's appraising the wine and determining its region of origin, and in the original, Sanji bluntly states that he's dead wrong and embarrasses Full Body. But not here. Here, instead of that, Sanji is going to swoon and yell assorted Full Body chwans, and the meal will actually go very well for Full Body. Perhaps he and Moody may even have a second, third, or even fourth date, and then bam, look, now they're married. Maybe, I don't know. I also don't care. What I care about is Sanji, and what Sanji cares about is men. And that's why when Luffy initially asks Sanji to join the crew, he's going to accept immediately. Because yes, Sanji has a debt to Zeph, and we'll settle that in a bit, but in this world, Sanji is a Luffy simp on Boa Hancock levels. He will do whatever Luffy asks. And you know what? Even if Sanji was on the fence, as soon as he sees Zoro sitting in the restaurant, he's done. But as an important distinction of relationship, Zoro and Sanji are going to be much more friendly in this world. Sanji will simp, and Zoro will tolerate said simpage. So Nami's going to betray the crew, to which Sanji isn't surprised. But then Don Krieg launches his assault on Baratie. And this is a problem because Sanji is incapable of fighting anyone in Don Krieg's crew, because his crew is the biggest pirate sausage party in all of East Blue. But thankfully, Sanji never beats Pearl or Gin in the actual series either, so he's just going to take a bit more of a beating than usual. Whatever the case, we will have defended Baratie, Sanji thanks Zeph, and we move on to Along Park, which does have some pretty fun moments. For example, at one stage, Zoro calls Nami an evil witch woman, and Sanji, in this case, is going to agree, thus in deepening their bond. In the actual series, this is where their rivalry started, but in our series, it's where their friendship starts. Nojiko offers to tell the crew Nami's backstory, but in a bit of a weird situation, no one really cares. Luffy wanders off, Zoro goes to sleep, Sanji's not interested in hearing a story about a woman told by a woman, so it's really just Usopp who's invested here. But Sanji is determined to follow Luffy, so we're gonna go and save Nami anyway. Which is problematic as once again, Sanji is literally incapable of fighting anyone in the Arlong Pirates. Knowing this, he'll probably volunteer to help Luffy instead of Usopp, and honestly, he'll do the thing that he should have done in the actual series, which is just kick Luffy out of the stone, much like how Sanji demolished the giant stone slab thrown at him a page earlier. It's a slightly complicated interaction, because Sanji volunteers to fight Kurubi, Usopp grabs Luffy, then accidentally lets Luffy go, that hits Chu, Usopp's fighting Chu now, but none of that is going to happen this time around. It's going to be much more streamlined. And with Luffy free, he'll probably be the one to beat Kurubi, as Arlong watches passively from his fish chair. Inevitably though, they're all beaten, Nami joins the crew, and then this is our next big twist. The dynamic of Sanji and Nami is going to mirror the regular series dynamic of Sanji and Zoro. Sanji and Nami are both highly emotionally charged individuals who are going to be furious with each other most of the time. And at this point, we've really yet to experience true full force Sanji. But don't worry, his moment is coming. During Alabasta, that is, because even regular Sanji doesn't do too much before then. He's asleep for Whiskey Peak, he wanders off during Little Garden, and he's mostly unconscious for Drum Island. You could maybe make the argument that he wouldn't fall asleep during Whiskey Peak because that was due to him being slathered in women, but Baroque Works is gonna do whatever it takes. Instead of flirting with 20 women, it's gonna be 20 men and we'll have the same outcome. In any case, we're skipping to the Civil War in Alabasta. So originally when the Straw Hats split up, Sanji ended up in a group with Chopper facing off against Mr. Four and Miss Merry Christmas, which is very fortunate because Sanji can defeat her quite easily, and without Miss Merry Christmas, Mr. Four is useless. We don't even have to beat him, we could just leave him alone if we wanted. Doesn't matter, he's irrelevant now. Some big old ducks then inform Sanji that Usopp is in trouble, which then sets off the chain of events that takes Sanji to Bon Clay. Luckily though, since we've already dealt with Mr. Four and Miss Merry Christmas, Chopper and Usopp are now here, so it's 3-on-1. And should Bon Clay transform into Nami, then Sanji will waste no time taking this opportunity to strike and defeat him. Everything else falls into place, Crocodile falls from the sky, and Alabasta is cleared, with Sanji for the first time really getting to prove his worth. Jaya mostly passes without incident, and things only get real problematic during Skypiea. Quite specifically, the Ordeal of Balls, which is a fantastic alternate title for this video, and due to Satori having balls, Sanji cannot fight him. A workaround here would be that Sanji captures Satori while Luffy finishes him off, just reversing what happens in the actual series. Other than that, pretty smooth sailing during Skypiea. Now during Long Ring Longland, Zoro and Sanji had a bit of a rough time in the groggy ring, but not on this occasion, because Sanji is going to willingly become the Ball Man. And you know what, there's a definite ball theme happening with Sanji even without this video. But these two will decimate their opponents with perfect teamwork right from the get-go. Remembering that this is a game, and so Sanji doesn't have to fight his opponents, they'll find a way around it. Then on Water 7, Sanji, infuriated by the Frankie family beating up Usopp because how dare a man be harmed, he will then attack the Frankie family, but because Mozu and Kiwi aren't there, Sanji is mostly useless again. Sanji then follows Robin onto the train. Nothing he can really do there either though. He can't beat Wanzi, he can't even beat Jerry, and in fact all of the cars are just packed with men. Curses, foiled again by his one extraordinarily common weakness. On the bright side, his any sloppy matchup goes very well, thoroughly defeating Caliphate, which does leave Jabra, but he's not all that important to deal with. Kaku's key is the one we need, so all that matters is that he goes down. So we're going to rescue Robin and move on. Thriller Bark is an interesting ordeal. Sanji won't be able to save Nami from Absalom, and therefore Nami and Absalom will be officially married under local Thriller Bark law. This, I also want to point out, is the first of 2 Nami wedding scenarios in this video. But in the end, Absalom isn't going to be a huge X factor, and someone else will deal with him, and if anything, Sanji can go and defeat Perona. As for Sabati Archipelago, no notes, it's perfect, it all just happens as is, which is rather tragically, and Sanji gets sent by Kuma to Momoiro Island. And so Sanji ends up on an island exclusively populated by men. This is his paradise, genuinely his equivalent of Amazon Lily. Sanji might even willingly put on the dress, however it will shortly be transformed into hell. For the next 2 years, Sanji has to defeat the 99 masters of Newcomer Kenpo for the 99 attack cuisine recipes. And knowing Sanji's bias, Ivankov will use his powers and the Newcomer masters will take female bodies. So Sanji will be traumatized by women once more. Cut past the time skip, and after not seeing any men for 2 years, Sanji's nosebleeds are particularly problematic, and his time at the Mermaid Cafe is spent largely unenjoyed. No killer nosebleeds, but also being surrounded by women after escaping an island full of women isn't exactly his idea of a good time. He's kind of useless again during Fishman Island, but it's fine. Even if Sanji can't help beat Wadatsumi, it's Wadatsumi, and none of the Straw Hats are particularly pushed during this arc. Easy dub. But that's going to be the last time in this video that anything is going to go according to plan, because I now present the most critical arc for our Sanji, Punk Hazard. During this arc, Sanji gets put into Nami's body, and this is hilarious because this is his absolute nightmare. It would be like this world's equivalent of if the body swap happened with Zoro. Sanji is now deeply entrenched in the soft, weak, and very annoying vessel of his crew rival. But here's the thing. There is a very real chance that Sanji dies on Punk Hazard. Let me explain. In chapter 677, Sanji, still in Nami's body, is struggling to run away from Caesar's Shinokuni chemical weapon. Nami's body just does not allow him to keep going until he gropes Nami's breast and starts sprinting ahead. This is played for comedy, but this could genuinely be the end for him. In this world, he doesn't have that pervert power source, and so he may fall behind. Brook, Zoro, and Kinemon are also there, but they can't help him because they're also desperately trying to save their own lives. Even after adopting Brook's running strategy, none of them can carry Sanji and be fast enough to outrun the Shinokuni gas. So Sanji Nami falls behind, gets caught by the gas, paralyzed, and petrified. But he's not dead. Yet. So this gas, the Shinokuni, it's a painfully vague substance. It's about as close to a deadly chemical weapon as Echiro Oda is willing to go in our fun pirate adventure. But before we get to Sanji's fate, this has a nasty series of domino effects to deal with. During the final conflict, Tashigi and many of the G5 Marines are going to be killed by Virgo because Sanji isn't there to save them. And Virgo's mission was to assassinate the G5 Marines and report their deaths as an accident. This is particularly devastating because this section contains the G5 medical team that Sanji leads to the children going berserk. But with no Sanji and no medical team, there's a very real possibility that Mokka dies after consuming all of the candies that were laced with the NCH-10, aka the energy steroids. Child death, very tragic. But let's get back to Sanji's fate with the Shinokuni. The effects of this weapon can be treated if the victim is broken out of the shell within half a day, and we can safely assume that Sanji Nami would be. However, the actual poison was not able to be treated on Punk Hazard, even after they tortured Caesar into telling them how to treat it. So even if he has that knowledge, Chopper does not have the resources to cure Sanji. And the only reason why the G5 Marines survived is because they were picked up and treated in time by the Marine doctors. The only way Sanji survives is if he gets treated by the Marines. However, Luffy by this point has also made an alliance with Trafalgar Law that he needs to honor, and they need to move onwards to Dressrosa and just generally away from Punk Hazard before the reinforcing Marines arrive. So the crew split up pre-Dressrosa. Sanji in Nami's body is going to turn himself into the Marines in order to be cured, making a promise that, yeah, I'll meet up with you guys later, ho ho ho, whilst the rest of the crew with Trafalgar Law move on to Dressrosa. The reason why Nami can't go with Sanji or be swapped back into her own body is because they need her to navigate in the new world. The Thousand Sunny does not sail without Nami. Now, the main problem this causes with Dressrosa is that the crew don't meet Viola, which means that Zoro is the one who saves the Thousand Sunny from Doflamingo's attack, as he was informed of Jola's assault by Wicker. So in the actual arc, Zoro runs back to the Sunny, but he runs into Sanji, and they decide that Sanji heads back. But in this case, Zoro ends up aboard the Thousand Sunny, with Brook, Chopper, Momonosuke, Caesar, and Nami in Sanji's body. After which point, the Big Mom Pirates attack, and the Sunny has to move on to Zo with Zoro in command. This does create a slight issue of who's going to defeat Pika, but not a big enough issue to stop the downfall of Doflamingo. Mostly because Law serves as a pretty hard counter to Pika should the need arise. But Zo and Whole Cake Island, this is where things get particularly insane. Whilst on Zo, Capone Gang Beige will arrive to effectively blackmail Sanji. However, the person he encounters is Nami in Sanji's body. And despite any objections, Beige is here to complete a mission. And so he will successfully abduct Nami Sanji, taking her to Whole Cake Island, and essentially Nami is now engaged to Charlotte Pudding. So this is now Nami's second non-consensual wedding. Meanwhile, actual Sanji has been treated and cured by this point, and Smoker has probably acquiesced and just turned the other way, allowing Sanji to escape. So he'll be on his way to Zo, assuming that Law gave him a piece of Beppo's Vivia card, but it's gonna take him a while. He may even arrive there after the Dressrosa team, and I don't think that Sanji will be returning to the crew anytime soon. And without a navigator, the Straw Hats can't actually use the Thousand Sunny to go after Nami Sanji, and having already said goodbye to the Bato Club, this means that we need to borrow a navigator, and that is probably Beppo, the navigator of the Heart Pirates, and someone who has a genuine tragic connection to Whole Cake Island through his brother Zeppo. So the Sanji retrieval team is now the Nami retrieval team, and it consists of Luffy, Chopper, Brook, Pedro, Beppo, and Carrot will of course stow away, as everyone else proceeds on to Wano. And amazingly, despite how much of an absolute shit show this has become, Whole Cake Island turns out to be a very simple affair. Luffy finds Nami Sanji and they leave. That's it. Very possibly with the assistance of Sanji's three kind and empathetic brothers, Ichiji, Niji, and the other one. And also Jinbei goes along with them because why not? Unfortunately, this leads to the eradication of the Vinsmoke family, who were going to be killed even if the wedding was successful. The Fire Tank Pirates will try and fail to assassinate Big Mom, almost certainly perishing themselves, and due to only being mildly annoyed and full of delicious wedding cake, Big Mom will not pursue Luffy to Wano. But for us, it's straight on to Wano, but it should be noted that Luffy has not learned Future Sight, and that's bad. He's going into Wano even more underpowered than he already was. So we arrive on the island without a Sanji, but with a Jinbei. That's nice. And due to the time lag of Wano, you know, the whole needing to wait 2 weeks for the Fire Festival, because of that forced waiting period, Sanji will finally catch up and Law will swap Nami and Sanji's bodies back. However, due to Big Mom not chasing the crew, Kid and Killer are likely going to die in the Udon prison because Queen was drowning them, and there is nothing that anyone else could have done about it. So that's sad, but hey, at least it saves Kid the embarrassment of the Shanks situation in the future. But it also means that we need to beat Queen right here and right now to proceed. But the thing is, Queen isn't even the biggest problem. The biggest problem is his plague tech. And in particular, it's Babanuki, the elephant smile user. In the series, Luffy uses Future Sight to stop Babanuki filling the prison with, quote, the concentrated power of 200 doses of plague. And as he thwarts it, Luffy even acknowledges that I saw a pretty bad future just now. In this world, that bad future is gonna happen because Luffy doesn't have Future Sight, which means the prisoners won't rebel alongside them. They'll be used to infect Luffy and anyone else who came to rescue him. In fact, Luffy is going to infect himself by cuddling with all of the prisoners. And whilst Luffy probably could have beaten Queen if he remained in his standard state, this has removed any chance of that happening. Everyone here will be overwhelmed by the mummy plague. Queen will prevail. Luffy will die with a smile on his face. The rest of the Straw Hats will be wiped out in an attempted raid. Wano will remain in the clutches of Kaido. Joy Boy will never liberate the world, and we will fall into a brand new age of darkness overseen by Emu. And that's what would happen if Sanji was gay. Who would have thought that the entire Jenga tower that is One Piece was held together by this one grab of a breast? I hate Sanji. I hate the way he holds this perfect balance of comedy, action, and drama, seamlessly slipping into every possible role in the series like he owns the place. But most of all, I hate that crappy Cook smug eyebrows. Nobody should be smug with eyebrows like this. Nobody. This intro was brought to you by Zoro Gang. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece, and today it's time to talk about fan-generated controversy with this very curly-eyed chap. Because Sanji has been stirring again after the events of Chapter 1005, and anime-only watchers, do not worry, I won't be spoiling anything in this video, primarily because there is nothing to spoil. Sanji basically did what Sanji always does, and now there's some very vocal peeps on the internet who are unhappy with it as per usual. And to clarify, I personally don't hate Sanji, but I do hate the Sanji hate, and so we're going to sit down here today and just unravel that complex web of Sanji feels. The first step towards which would be the act of you subscribing to the Grand Line Review, which will result in regular injections of One Piece culture administered straight into your YouTube feed. Make sure not to miss out on this exquisitely prepared button from our fantastic chef. To get into things though, let's be real, we have not just arrived at this video as a result of manga events. The Sanji hate train has been chewing for an awfully long time at this point, longer than most people watching this video will have even been fans of One Piece, really. But there is a rather potent sentiment often expressed that Sanji is, well, he's something of a joke. He gets used for all sorts of perverted gags and as a stepping stone for other characters, whilst never really getting the time to be cool himself. And a lot of that is quite true to a degree. I probably wouldn't quite use those words, nor would I state it as negative. And to express what I'm talking about, let's go ahead and make a Straw Hat cocktail. So here are all of the ingredients you need to make a perfect Sanji. 1 part action, 1 part comedy, 1 part drama. Mix them all around and you will end up with this swirly browed chef. And while this may sound simple, Sanji's perfect balance of action, drama, and comedy is something that very, very few characters have access to. To demonstrate, let's make a Zoro. So what you'll need for this recipe is 3 parts action, 1 part comedy, and 1 part drama, because his comedic and dramatic aspects are heavily overshadowed by his action prowess. Well, let's try Nami. To make a Nami, you need to take 3 parts comedy, 2 parts drama, and half a part of action if we're lucky, and happen happened to have the right bartender during that particular arc. But the point is that these characters tend to have either an incredibly dominant or super submissive feature. The only other Straw Hat that I would equate to having equal parts action, comedy, and drama would be Luffy. He's a perfect archetype like that, so Sanji is in very good company. I would describe him as something of a dramatic multi-tool. He can flip seamlessly from any of these key features, which makes him pretty absurdly versatile. At the same time, however, this also means that he doesn't have that key defining feature that some people may be consistently looking for. And if you've become invested in Sanji for his action feats, which is kind of an accidental pun really, considering he uses, his feet for action feats. But if someone is invested in Sanji for that action aspect, then this balance dictates that the other 66.6% of the time, they may become just a little bit unsatisfied with Sanji when his role is relegated to that of comedy and drama. And I think that's quite understandable. I mean, I, for one, can't imagine a world where Zoro would be clowned around and, kicked in the balls by a bubble bath assassin, mostly because comedy is not Zoro's strongest feature. Sanji, however, can get away with this because he is a clown. He is a very talented jester equipped with his own very fancy hat, and one of Oda's key weapons in reminding us that this is, at the end of the day, a pretty goofy pirate manga. Sanji is often not cool. In fact, sometimes he even borders on being kind of pathetic. But that's what gives his character the kind of range that the others do not have. It's what makes him a very unique member of the Straw Hats in particular, because at any given moment he could fall anywhere between being the coolest smoking kicking mofo alive, or he could be a writhing powerless simp. And once again, I don't say that as a bad thing, because characters having negative, even hindrance-inducing traits are what makes them interesting. It's one of the things that I, as a Zoro fanboy, really wish we got a lot more of from him, with the exception of the whole getting lost and, I guess, getting drunk thing. And we can even have an argument over whether or not these jokish traits of Sanji are even in fact negative at all. I mean, the whole blatant pervert thing is, well, it's one we probably can't really get away from. However, the other one that tends to annoy people more often than not is Sanji's chivalry. The idea that Sanji will not hurt a woman under any circumstances, including to save his own life. And any time that Sanji's powerlessness against women is brought up in the story, this channel inevitably receives a ton of comments lamenting how lame Sanji is and how poorly he tends to be written and treated by Oda. And to be fair to this thought for a second, I do remember feeling similarly when I was first reading the Enies Lobby arc. I saw Sanji matched up against Califa and I was like, oh yeah, alright. This is the time where we are going to see some amazing growth from Sanji. He's going to be forced to confront this whole woman thing and he will better himself. And well, it didn't quite turn out like that, and it was quite disappointing when it did not in any way happen. For full context though, I was also like 16 years old at the time that this was published and had really no care for nuance, or I guess character in general. I was reading One Piece for the action. In fact, I vividly remember when Robin's flashback started. I hated that because it meant that the action was going to be delayed by at least a month. Ugh, how annoying. But these days, in my old age, I'm very much the opposite. Flashbacks are some of my favorite aspects of the series because they dump you with all of the coveted information about characters in the world, and they hit the hardest in terms of drama. Meanwhile, these days I look at action and go, that choreography, that was pretty cool, but that's just kind of all it was. And in the end, it's almost more of a hindrance to progressing the story. And I have a similar flipped opinion regarding Sanji's chivalry. As a teenager, I saw this trait as an incredible detriment. Something utterly ridiculous, like why is he not working to overcome this? Especially when you've got someone like Usopp over here fighting his hardest to overcome his own detrimental trait of cowardice. But my mistake there was conflating two very different ideas. Later on in life, what really struck me is that Usopp sees his cowardice as a detriment, and so he works to overcome that. Meanwhile, Sanji sees his chivalry as a benefit. He sees his rule of not hitting women as something that makes him a better person, a core value that he would rather die than forfeit. And to me, there's just something very admirable about that, even if I don't share that value myself. In a life or death situation, I'm just saying, probably gonna hit ya no matter how you identify with gender. Which is why I respect Sanji's decisions even more, because he will not, under any circumstances, compromise his beliefs. It's very Luffy-like, really. Luffy will never compromise his philosophy regarding anything. There is really nothing anyone can do to move Luffy away from those core values. And I'd argue that's what One Piece fans love about him. So I would very much apply the same logic to Sanji. And post-time skip events have only made that even more profound. After experiencing his extended childhood and learning that the only people who were in any way kind to him were women, I do think it makes sense in this world for Sanji to have developed this way. Furthermore, Sanji did also have this philosophy drilled into him, probably quite literally by Zeph, who very ironically, violently insisted that men should never harm women. So this idea is tied to Sanji every bit as much as his dream to find the All Blue. And would it be be interesting to see Sanji have to confront that? Yes, I think it would be. Then again, every time he lives up to his ideals, that is a victory for Sanji in my mind, even if that results in the defeat in terms of a fight. Back to being a derp clown though, I find that a lot of Sanji criticisms tend to focus on the idea that his comedic aspects are just way out of whack with the action and even dramatic features. Specifically, the action, I suppose, is the main complaint. And what I think those thoughts fail to contend with is the idea that Sanji comedy does not usually exist in a vacuum, definitely not the important moments anyway. So let's take Enies Lobby for example. Sanji fights Caliphar, he gets thoroughly clowned. It is, admittedly, pretty funny. Comedy. Tick. After this absolute decimation, a desperate situation is triggered whereby Nami must step in and boldly take on a superhuman assassin. Drama. Tick. And finally, after exiting the scenario, Sanji then finds his true opponent in Jabra, resulting in a big old tick for action as well. This is the perfect balance that is Sanji. Equal parts of everything, and whilst it might be kind of frustrating to see him made a mockery of when focusing on a single chapter or even a single scene, in the grand scheme of things, these moments serve a double and in some cases even triple purpose, enhancing both action and drama later on. Let's have another example. Fishman Island. This is where fans will often cite Sanji as being at his most annoying, and I do kind of agree with that, admittedly. Fishman Island for Sanji really was just one gigantic mess of nosebleeds and mermaid titties, which led to probably the most ridiculous Sanji situation to date, whereby he needed a full-blown blood transfusion to recover from having a face full of boob. And to make matters worse, the transfusion came from the two Okama. I think the names were Splash and Splatter, so this whole situation was pretty extremely odd. However, in an insane twist of narrative, this ridiculous plot point actually serves as the crux of the entire Fishman Island arc. It's only because of this stupid, and I repeat stupid moment, that we discover the Fishman human blood taboo, and that is what allows Jinbei to have his moment of breaking down racial boundaries by offering his blood to Luffy at the end of the arc. That's right, Sanji's clownish nosebleeds is what allows us to feel that full weight of drama brought on by Jinbei. Now, could this have been done another way? Probably. I think it could have been done far less extremely goofily, but then again, that is the beauty of Sanji. He's the kind of character that can simply get away with crap like that, so Oda doesn't have to do something convoluted and painfully logical. And sure, a lot of these situations do come at Sanji's expense, but that's how a dramatic multi-tool is best utilized, with its wide variety of functions building towards something greater. And so long as the payoff lands, I am usually absolutely fine with the weird setups. If the payoff doesn't land, well then that's when I'll start complaining at great length. But in regards to chapter 1005, well that was no different than anything I've stated here. Sanji's narratively advantageous characteristics were invoked, a joke was made, and it resulted in a fantastic action piece for a character I won't name, as well as a very sound dramatic callback. The setup was perhaps a little bit clunky, but it did pay off. Which is all well and good, but another argument that does often come up is that Sanji was treated far better pre-time skip, many more, quote, proper fights and such. And I guess that's also technically true, but really, how many proper pre-time skip fights did Sanji have that weren't also complete jokes? I can think of two off the top of my head. You've got Karubi and you've got Jabra, but the whole Jabra one was only really possible due to being clowned around by Caliphar earlier on. But what else do we have? Bon Clay on Alabasta? Well, that was an almost purely comical affair until the final blows. Skypiea maybe against Satori, but is that really a proper fight considering it was a 3v1? How about Onesie on the Sea Train? Are things really a proper fight when your opponent is a weird joke noodle dude? So I guess we should move to Thriller Bark then, where Sanji's proper fight was against Absalom and entirely predicated on the idea that Sanji wanted to be more of a pervert than he already is. So this whole idea that Sanji has somehow had this incredible CV of like serious proper fights pre-time skip is very nostalgia colored. And honestly, I think the only real difference is that he won those fights as opposed to his post-time skip CV, where he does face pretty amazing serious opponents like Virgo, Doflamingo, Judge, and Page 1, only for those fights to either be inconclusive or for Sanji to lose. And on that note, I will empathize with those that crave action. Sanji still gets plenty of it though, even if it doesn't generally result in the desired outcomes. At the same time though, Sanji is flooded with action compared to characters like Chopper, Robin, Nami, and even Frankie. I mean, you just try being a Robin fan in particular. This woman hasn't had a proper fight in the last 15 years of real-time publication. And the answer I receive most often in regards to that is, well, Robin doesn't need to fight. That's not her purpose in the story. She's the archaeologist, you see. And I get the same thing with Nami as well. Nami doesn't need to fight. It's not her thing. She's the navigator, you see. And with Chopper as well. He doesn't need to do the fighting. He's the doctor, you see. Yes, I see. But really, I guess we could say the same for Sanji. He is a cook whose dream is to find a bunch of water. He excels excels at intelligent thought, comedic relief, and acting as a support mechanism for other characters. He does not need to fight, you see, but he does anyway. And those super hardcore Sanji fans who don't like the way that Oda handles him really have no idea just how lucky they are. He is by far the most versatile Straw Hat. And if you really do want a character who has this overwhelming focus on action, then let me introduce you to Zoro. Trust me, he will never disappoint you. But Sanji will. He fails. He fails often. And he also frequently gets used as a gag. But these features, combined with his affinity for action, are what makes him so interesting. And if you'd like to investigate some more Sanji content, then please do check out this playlist of the essentials of Sanji. But for now, this has been the Grand Line Review, and I'll see you next time. What would happen if Zoro ate a devil fruit? Or Sanji? Or Nami? Or Noseboy? Toy Robot? Or perhaps even Uncle Fish? Well, we actually know the answer to this question. I guess it's questions plural. Because Eiichiro Oda has revealed canonically which devil fruits each currently not fruit-using Straw Hat would have, and let me tell you, it's not what you'd expect. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece. My name is Liam and I've been eating fruit for about 3 decades now, and still, somehow, no magic powers. So I'm not gonna lie, I'm a bit upset about that. Particularly since our Straw Hat Pirates have been assigned their magical powers by the Lord of all fruit vendors, Eiichiro Oda. Here's a weird thing though. The Straw Hats have never found a devil fruit. They've been sailing this world for almost 25 years of real life time now, not that much in world time, but unlike most prominent crews, they have never stumbled across one of these filthy yet juicy power snacks. That's going to change today though, because we've got 6 surprise fruits for each of our neglected crew members, who are Zoro, Sanji, Nami, Usopp, Frankie, and Jinbei. Also, as we discover what their powers are, I will be drawing portraits of them because I don't know why. I'm not a good artist or even an artist. And also everyone I've consulted about this thinks it is a terrible idea, so let's just look forward to that. 3 of those consultants being Game Bear Advanced Melanie B and Beat Zero PP, which is a bit sad. I feel like you should be beating at least one. But all 3 of whom consulted themselves with sheer glory by doing the amazing thing of pressing the subscribe button for the Grand Line Review, which will result in consistent injections of One Piece culture being administered directly into your YouTube feed. And if you want to be our next subscriber of the day, then hit the button and please do say hi in the comments below if you are a new member of the Grand Fleet. Welcome. All right, let's start with Sanji. Before I reveal the fruit Oda gave him, I did also ask for your opinions in the community section, and a lot of you went with the classic Mero Mero no Mi, giving Sanji some literal added firepower. Although another answer I quite liked was, Sanji would do well with Streisand's fruit, the Big Mom Chef-a-fer, who could cut things and turn them into food. And even though the food does taste awful, I do like this answer, because I feel like Sanji is such a superb chef that he would be able to make anything taste good. Meanwhile, we also had some classic options. Sanji would love an invisibility fruit to watch Nami bathe. As well as, what about Sanji using Kinemon's fruit power in order to dress women as he pleases? And those were the majority of the comments. So we're really not putting too much good faith in Sanji's priorities here. However, that is for good reason, because the official answer isn't much better. According to Oda, Sanji would eat the Sui Sui no Mi, which was Senor Pink's devil fruit that allowed him to swim through solid substances, with Oda's specific comments being, it allows one to slip through walls or swim on the ground. If given to Sanji, it would become quite the nasty ability. Nasty, meaning would use to infiltrate some, how shall we say, female private spaces? This was a big surprise though, especially considering Sanji's canonical desire to eat the Suke Suke no Mi for some of that delicious invisibility. Outside of the world of naked ladies though, this fruit could be pretty amazing for Sanji, particularly because he does have at least one water-based ability, being Blue Walk. But then again, if he was on solid ground, then he could just use regular walk, you know, like the rest of us do. It would be something of an interesting duality, I suppose, because then Sanji would have both a fire and water effect. I mean water, but not water. Like solid water, which I guess is technically ice, but this is not ice. All right, and are you ready? Because this is the portrait of Sanji that I drew, and it's basically just him in Speedos. Ready to swim and stuff. Did I mention I'm drawing these all completely from memory as well? And apparently one of the only key things I can remember about Sanji is that he has very, very hairy legs. Next up is Usopp, and of every Straw Hat here, this boy has some of the greatest potential, with one impressive double bill Grand Fleet suggestion being, Usopp would benefit from either Kanjuro or Viola's fruit, with Viola's fruit giving him extended vision, and Kanjuro's fruit giving him creative ways to attack, which I think would be amazing, and I'm definitely more interested in Kanjuro's fruit. Usopp is a fantastic artist with a wild imagination, so giving him the ability to bring any drawing to life would potentially risk making him overpowered within the non-Haki tier of punch fighters, especially because he'd probably use it to bring all sorts of crazy crazy gadgets to life, stuff that he can imagine but may not necessarily have the knowledge to construct. Meanwhile, another Grand Fleet member suggested, this might sound strange, but Usopp should have Belo Betty's fruit, which is the Kobu Kobu no Mi, the power to encourage people to awaken their full potential, which would have been very useful on more than one occasion with Usopp. Any Slobby obviously comes to mind, when it fell to Usopp to inspire Luffy to get up and punch a big old kitty cat in his whisker-clad face, as well as the rest of his body. The rest of his body was also important. But then again, Usopp is only good with words sometimes. The fruit would be utterly wasted when it came to his various illnesses and cowardice and such. However, the official answer from Oda is the Poke Poke no Mi, a devil fruit that you may never have heard of, but you have seen used very briefly with Blamenko, one of the Whitebeard commanders. It's essentially the ability to create seemingly infinitely deep pockets within one's body, which is great for Usopp because it means he can store an infinity of gadgets and weapons and plants and art supplies and whatever he wants. Like, I'm used to Usopp metaphorically pulling something out of his ass to win a fight, like, you know, a giant inflatable hammer. Where did that come from? But with this fruit, he could quite literally pull something out of his ass. So thank the Lord of Crap that he doesn't have it. And Oda's specific comments were, the perfect pocket for someone like Usopp who always has something up his sleeve. Master author Eiichiro Oda, they're confusing the concepts of pockets and sleeves. I mean, I guess both of them are just holes for things, but then again, that also describes a lot of things. So we need to get just a little bit more specific. All right, and here is my Usopp. I think it's pretty much just your standard Usopp, except his pockets are much bigger. Now, in my defense, I think it's very difficult for a completely talentless hack to do this ability justice, so this is just kind of what we've got to work with. Now, remember that Nami also exists, and in terms of fictional fruit, she's a very intriguing case. A lot of Grand Fleet members commented with the desire to give her some form of Logia, an existing one being the Yuki Yuki no Mi, Monet's snow Logia, which should exist and be ripe for nomming because Monet is, of course, dead. And there was even a very popular theory back in the day that Monet's fruit would be reincarnated within Nami's Mikan trees aboard the Thousand Sunny. Other commenters also mentioned the possibility of a Cloud Logia or a Wind Logia or just any kind of Logia really. Elemental Control was a very popular and fitting choice for Nami. She'd almost certainly do well with any type of Logia, even the Swamp Logia. And who knows, it may even give Nami access to a Carabo-style tongue, which is cursed, and I regret saying that. As for actual answers though, this is better than any of us could have expected because Oda states, the Goro Goro no Mi, a true weather lady. Now no one can stop her anymore, apart from Luffy. Although the problem here being that sure, Luffy is the natural counter to lightning, but Nami is also the natural counter to Luffy. So no, Nami just plain becomes invincible across the board. The idea of Nami with NL's Devil Fruit is amazing though. I mean, she's already kind of capable of his power just with a ton of extra steps. I can imagine she'd actually use it a lot better due to having more advanced knowledge of lightnings as a phenomena, as opposed to NL, who is more along the lines of, ooh, I can make big booms. I am God now. Which I will say was a slightly arrogant approach, considering he was defeated by a glorified human rubber band. A Logia ability would also stop Nami from being injured so easily, you know, less of a glass cannon and more like a magic intangible cannon, which is always preferable. Now as for Nami, at first I thought I'd draw her in some kind of cool NL cosplay, but then I remembered I couldn't draw. So instead I just drew Nami making the NL face. And that gets the point across, right? I'm definitely craving some sword action though, and for that we will now turn to Franky, because he has a big ol' Frankensword. There was a fairly strong consensus within the Grand Fleet that Franky would benefit from Eustace Kid's Devil Fruit, the Jiki Jiki no Mi, because it would essentially give Franky the power to engineer crazy stuff without actually needing to invest the time into the engineering aspect of engineering. He could create a whole army of General Frankies or even use the fruit to repair his own General Franky after being damaged in combat. It's hard to say if he'd want something like that though. You know, I feel like Franky would consider it cheating somehow. If engineering was a game and it was possible to cheat, this would be cheating. A good shipwright / mecha pilot should not need magical powers to do their job. And I guess Oda agrees because he's gone down a slightly different yet incredibly more predictable path of assigning Franky with the Buki Buki no Mi, which was the weapon fruit used by Baby 5, and Oda's comment on this being, can't get any better than this for an ability for Franky. And I have to agree, I'd also think he'd be able to unlock 100% more more of its potential than Baby 5 did. This fruit has always been quite confusing because its functionality is incredibly vague. You know, does the fruit come with a set menu of weapons to transform into? Or does the fruit allow the user to transform into any weapon that they are capable of thinking of? Because if it's the second, then this is an Usopp level scenario. Frankie with Baby 5's Devil Fruit would then be like Usopp with Kanjuro's Drawing Fruit. With Frankie's creative mind, there would be just an infinity of weapons. Although priority number one would of course be installing nipple lights on every single living being, as they well should be. Now with Frankie, he is so big that I ran out of space trying to draw him, so I decided to focus on the most important aspect of his weaponry, which are of course the nipple lights. And this is easily the worst drawing so far. Emphasis on the word so far. Let's talk about the real sword lad now, because the Grand Fleet had some strong feelings here, including Robin's Hana Hana no Mi. More hands, more swords, more power. Which I guess has some truth to it. I mean, if Zoro could carry more swords, he probably would. For example, there's this really questionable image of Zoro using Yontoryu or four sword style on the internet, except the fourth sword is clenched between his behind cheeks, which honestly I don't think is too much more ridiculous than using a sword in your mouth. At all times, we should remember that that is weird. At the very least, it would probably offer him some protection from sneak attacks. However, Oda has a very intriguing answer here, stating that Zoro would use Kaido's Devil Fruit and become a mythical dragon. But more specifically, he says, "I'd want the sword to turn into a dragon rather than Zoro." And that's fair. I would also want the sword to turn into a dragon. If the sword turned into Zoro, then that would just be weird. I love the idea that Zoro is not becoming the fruit user in this hypothetical. He's gaining a Devil Fruit infused weapon. But because that does go a little bit against the spirit of this video, we have another Grand Fleet suggestion, which is Mr. One's fruit so he himself becomes a blade. And as if Zoro wouldn't want that. His whole life is swords. Well, swords and alcohol, I suppose, but mostly swords. And really, how can you become the world's greatest swordsman if you aren't even a sword man? Drake Mihawk, you are a fraud. Now, when it comes to Zoro, I think I've conflated a couple of different ideas here. I mean, I did draw a sword, and I did draw that sword as a dragon, but I drew that dragon sword in his butt. So this is a Yontoryu style Zoro featuring Kaido's Devil Fruit. And I'm a lot more proud of this than I think I should be. To our newest Straw Hat now, and unfortunately Jinbei does not have a canonical Devil Fruit, because the person who asked this question to Oda in an SBS forgot to include him, or deliberately did not include him. And you know, I'm not calling the person who asked this question to Oda racist, but I am heavily implying it. That's alright though, because the Grand Fleet came through with Jinbei suggestions, as many people did opt to saddle him with the Sui Sui no Mi, which was earlier given to Sanji, so that's a bit of a conflict, although it does make a bit of sense. I'm not going to say a lot, but a bit. Because if we're going to take away Jinbei's ability to swim in the water, then I guess we should balance things out with the power to swim on land at the very least. Jinbei would become such a force to be reckoned with because it would be like fighting a fishman in their natural environment. But we also had this. I wonder if Jinbei's Fishman Karate would work with the Gura Gura no Mi, since it allows you to grab the air. Which is an interesting thought because Fishman Karate does kind of mimic Whitebeard's abilities, or Whitebeard's ability mimics them, one or the other, just with water instead of air. So I imagine that Jinbei would have a natural advantage using it just due to being a master of a very similar art form already. So as for Jinbei, I have drawn him with Whitebeard's Devil Fruit, but I have also drawn him as a triangle, because that's pretty much what I see Jinbei as. A wise, masterful, old triangle. Please do feel free to comment with which Straw Hat portrait you think is the best, or actually, you know what, let's change that. Please do comment with which Straw Hat portrait you think is the least worst. But I also do have one more Jinbei Devil Fruit suggestion, which is the Cum Cum Fruit. And no, I am not drawing that. Did you know that Nami was originally meant to be one of the Straw Hat's top fighters? And as for what kind of fighter she would have been, well, I think the only way to really describe it is ripped jeans and cyborg battle axe. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece, and today we are here to examine what could have been as we take a deep dive into the original One Piece. Eiichiro Oda's initial ideas that, for whatever reason, were eventually scrapped. Which is all part of the creative process, although this process is on a completely different level in One Piece because Eiichiro Oda isn't really an artist who, settles for good enough. Which you can see quite clearly in his time-lapse drawings of color spreads. He will often discard 4 or 5 entirely workable composition ideas only to settle on something completely different different from where he initially set out. And this goes for every aspect of the series, be it character design, story choices, or even core features of the world. Another great example of which is the fact that originally there was only going to be one type of devil fruit, being the Gomu Gomu no Mi. So already with that choice in mind, One Piece is going to look pretty radically different and chock full of rubber people. But now let's continue our exploration of the original One Piece, and everything we've currently heard about the Gomu Gomu no Mi spawns from the One Piece prototypes of Romance Dawn. Two one-shot chapters that really do provide us with some bizarre insight into the intentions of Eiichiro Oda in the early days. One of which I quite enjoy is that Garp was originally supposed to be not only a pirate, but the figure whom Luffy received both his devil fruit and straw hat from. So Garp was very much poised to be an emotional center for Luffy, is what I'd like to say anyway, because as it turns out, using Garp in Romance Dawn was but a clever ruse from Oda, because he wanted to keep Shanks under wraps and really surprise people with the eventual first chapter of One Piece, which is a very bold move for a rookie mangaka producing a one-shot like that, but it absolutely paid off, showing that even at these very early stages, Oda was quite a scheming individual, always thinking about how One Piece could have its greatest impact. Now, speaking of impact, let's talk about Blackbeard, one of the most sinister mysteries in the series, but Oda's original intentions regarding him open up quite a profound window into this man thing, or more specifically, Oda's intentions regarding Blackbeard's family. Because in volume 8 of One Piece magazine, it was revealed that Oda had plans and even concept sketches of Blackbeard's mother as well as his two sisters. Now, it has been confirmed that these are only concepts and not canon at all thus far, but it is fascinating because Blackbeard, as known to us, is portrayed as a very lonely orphan boy. Thus far, we haven't had any hint of family, but the most interesting thing is when we look at the sketches of his intended sisters, because here we can also see a drawing of Ace reacting to them, which means that we can place exactly where their reveal was meant to happen in the series. Basically, Ace would have tracked down Blackbeard on Banaro Island and discovered him with his two not at all Blackbeard-looking sisters, which is to say that they are pretty and he is... well, look, I suppose beauty is subjective. I mean, I'm sure there's someone out there who probably wants a bit of a toss with Teach, but not me, probably not you, and definitely not Ace, who stumbles into this bizarre situation, this sickening murderer with a surprisingly delightful and charming family. And this is one of those things that sure seems to be a discarded idea, but I would keep it in mind going forward because it may be reworked in some way, shape, or form. Whereas something that was completely scrapped was a peculiar character trait intended for one Sir Crocodile. In the data book One Piece Green Secret Pieces, we learnt that Crocodile was supposed to be a figure that took quite a bit of inspiration from the Riddler. The idea being that Crocodile would frequently assault enemies and allies alike with these difficult riddles, and the really fun thing is that if we do look at one of his early sketches, his hook even took the shape of a funky question mark, which to be fair, it still sort of is that shape, but it was toned down slightly. But regardless, that's still quite a cool little origin story to Crocodile's hook there, and unlike a lot of original ideas, I'm quite glad that Oda, decided not to go with this one. And when you think about it, Crocodile doesn't have a gimmick. He's more of a straight up bad guy. And many of the more celebrated antagonists of One Piece also inhabit that sort of space, like say Rob Lucci or Charlotte Katakuri. And I for one cannot imagine Rob Lucci halting his battle with Luffy to pose a puzzling riddle, although maybe. Mugiwara, in order to defeat me, you must first answer these riddles 3. Question number the first. And then we cut to Luffy punching him in the face because nobody likes riddles, and it was a very good decision from Oda to let this idea go. Although the weird gimmicks tend to be given to lesser antagonists, and they do work to great effect, so And funnily enough, original Crocodile is not the only inspiration that was lifted from Batman, because way back in the day, Buggy was supposed to be a much more terrifying Joker-style character. I mean, just look at this art. It is downright sinister. It's legitimately like looking at the Joker in Buggy cosplay, perhaps after discovering that Bruce Wayne is some sort of crippling One Piece addict. Here's the best part though. So whilst Buggy was supposed to have this much edgier vibe, his original name certainly didn't quite match that vibe, in my opinion, as he was originally supposed to be called Boogie the Clown. And the reason why this change was eventually made had nothing at all to do with how it sounded, but everything to do with The Nightmare Before Christmas, which of course featured the character of Oogie Boogie, so I suppose that shut down that idea. Oh, and just while we're on Buggy, this is a very well-known change, but relevant nonetheless, because in case you're unaware, at one stage Zoro was going to be part of Buggy's crew. And Oda even described an intended crew dynamic where where there was something of a family, with Zoro acting in the role of the eldest brother. And whilst this is quite well known, it's an idea that still fascinates me to this day because it makes me wonder how Zoro would have eventually been recruited. And it's also another one of those situations where I think we're quite fortunate that Oda didn't settle for these initial plans, because what we got instead was far more powerful and far more potent. Whereas a lot of, lesser authors have a tendency to come up with an idea then immediately just set it into stone without necessarily exploring further and refining it. Oda's refinement in this case did throw a lot of initial plans out of whack though, one being that Nami was supposed to be the first crew member to join instead of Zoro. And this is pretty clear when we look back on both versions of Romance Dawn, as the Nami style character, either being Anne or Silk, is the first person to meet Luffy on his wacky quest, and that would be a role that would be given to Kobe in the actual series. But to return to the idea of a battle axe Nami from the intro, this picture is not the only one we have to go on, and there is a more subdued concept sketch where Nami is depicted with a more simplistic polearm style axe, once again indicating that she was meant to be a much more deadly member of the crew. Instead, the axe part eventually got taken off and Nami was given a glorified stick, and yeah, I guess it's just interesting to see that evolution. In many ways, it does seem like a bit of a downgrade because Battle Axe Nami looks so damn awesome, but then again, Nami and the climate act are just such a perfect fit when she eventually did get it, that is. Still, kinda wanna see Nami slice a fool. For another well-known intention, I do also get a kick out of the fact that Sanji was originally supposed to be named Naruto, Datebayo, etc. However, this was swiftly changed when a certain ninja manga began serialization prior to Naruto being introduced in the Baratie arc. And also quite interestingly, Naruto was originally supposed to be something of a gunslinger. He has this very old West vibe about him, and this is very different from how Naruto Sanji would eventually end up. And along with Nami's battle axe, it looks like at one stage Oda made the decision to just tone down the potential brutality of One Piece as a whole, giving characters like Nami and Naruto more blunt force-based attacks. I mean, you do still have cutting attacks from Zoro and gun-based attacks from Franky, but look, in the case of the latter, when have Franky's guns ever done anything of use? It's just like weapons left and then he shoots seemingly aimlessly. It's basically a theatrical effect because it never hits anything, and if it does, there is no damage. Whereas gunslinging Sanji really would have needed to use them guns to a much greater and probably much more brutal effect. Now, in addition to violence, we also have cases where character personalities were toned down. And for this, we're going to be looking specifically at Law. And you can actually see this within the series. Pre-time skip, Law is portrayed as a very mysterious dude guy. And while I wouldn't go so far as to say sinister, he had a very clear ominous agenda. And this ominosity is confirmed to us thanks again to One Piece magazine, where we have an early post-time skip sketch of Law interacting with Sanji. And here Sanji is using his brain thing. He twigs to the fact that Law is acting quite underhandedly, to which Law replies with something along the lines of, "Oh ho ho, you're quite sharp, aren't you?" With that like evil smug smirk. I'm very much into this kind of darker antagonist Law. Things could have gone so differently. Which is very different from how this interaction ultimately played out, as well as Law in general, who became much more sympathetic and an emotional protagonist style character. Something that we do know for a fact was not planned with his introduction because, and this is mind-blowing, but none of the Supernova members were planned to exist at all. So this is an example of improvisation at its most extreme and possibly most potent, because in an interview that Oda conducted for the 27th log, he stated that the supernovas didn't exist in any way, shape, or form prior to the very chapter in which they were introduced. And they were hastily constructed and thrown in because Oda thought that Sabati was not going to be a very interesting arc with things how they were, so at the last second he squeezed out 9 phenomenal character designs with no concept whatsoever of how integral they were going to become in the future. In fact, Oda has also said that he regrets making so many of them because it's been a lot to handle, but I personally could not disagree more. I can't even imagine what One Piece, especially what post-time skip One Piece, would have been without them. And we also have a very similar situation happening with the 7 Warlords actually, because Oda's original intentions was to have One Piece be a far more simplistic tale of facing off against the 4 emperors, a concept that would not even be introduced until almost a full decade into the series. So somewhere along the line, we clearly got a bit derailed. And that's primarily because, on a pure whim, Oda decided to drop in the idea of the 7 Warlords of the Sea quite early on. He had no grand plans with them. In fact, the number 7 was seemingly completely arbitrary. He just thought that 7 sounded, much cooler than other numbers, such as 5. 5 is always a very disappointing number after all, but the ripple effect of this decision is probably the most profound in the entire series, even more so than the last-minute supernovas, because these warlords swiftly took command of One Piece, with many of them taking an absolutely gigantic arc or even saga of their own, throne to explore and defeat. Think about it this way: Crocodile, Gecko Moria, and Doflamingo, our three main Luffy warlord antagonists. Together, their sagas take up 313 chapters of the series and 279 episodes. And as it stands, that is just under a third of One Piece as a whole, which would have taken up about 7 to 8 years of manga publication time, so that is 7 to 8 years of being sidetracked with Oda's arbitrary 7 warlords idea. And that doesn't even include arcs like Amazon Lily or just the sheer amount of time and space given to the warlords throughout the rest of One Piece. And this is why Oda is encouraged by both his editors and by himself to not dive too deeply into all of his ideas these days, because putting in stuff like this does have grand consequences, and we would never ever see the end of One Piece, which I don't know, personally I wouldn't be arguing too much with. But yeah, just keep in mind that what we're seeing these days is Oda's streamlined, abridged version of One Piece. Zoro versus Sanji.
Why are you doing this to me?
I'd like to engage in some power scaling, good sir, if you would humor me.
Boy.
Here's what's going to happen. I am going to give you a series of matchups, and you're going to tell me who wins and why.
Let's do it.
Eustace Kid versus Trafalgar Law.
I'm biased, obviously. I am more impressed with Law based on his abilities, and Puncture Willie is still the most impressive thing I've seen in this arc. I still have no idea what the hell that is. In context, Law was support for a lot of things. I think that's when he's at his best. And I think Kid, he doesn't get enough credit for just how much he can take, his stamina, and how creative he can be. So, unbiased opinion, Eustace Captain Kid, because I think he would probably outlast Law, and he is as creative with not as good a devil fruit. It's just not as appreciated because it's not as sexy.
So your response here is that Eustace Kid wins the fight, but Law is sexier.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying.
I think that keeps both sides happy, honestly.
Exactly. That's the goal in all this.
Stelly versus Saint Charlos.
Oh, man. Saint Charlos.
Can I just say, in this, I want you to say who will win the fight and who is the most sexy. We're going to be doing that from now on.
Okay, let's do it. I would say Stelly is sexier for sure. But Saint Charlos, there's no way he didn't awaken hockey or something after getting fucking clobbered.
A Luffy Gear 5th Awakening style reaction.
Yes, exactly. So I'd say Charlos wins that fight. He has to be stronger somehow now.
King versus Queen.
Obviously, King is sexier. But, you know, there's some people that appreciate the big boys, so I'm not going to down that. King wins. Ooh. King wins. Because I think Queen is, as brilliant as he is stupid. Well, I think he's an idiot, but he's brilliant. If, you know, they fight, it'd be difficult, but I think King wins.
Okay. So let me get this right. You think that King Bomb would defeat the Queen Mama Chan?
Hold on.
I've let you have your incoherent ramble, but this is controversial and we need to get to it.
Okay, hold on. Ask me that question.
Who did you think I was referring to? King Bomb versus Queen Mama Chanta, the ship, Big Mom's ship.
Oh my God, this is a lot more difficult of a matchup. I gotta go with King Bomb. I think the ship is sexier though.
Definitely tastier, I would say.
Yeah.
Would it work the same way if it was tag teaming, like King versus Queen? Or King and Queen versus King and Queen?
I don't know. Are we underwater? Actually, King can fly and Queen can do things. So yeah, still the same. Still the same thing. Absolutely.
And Queen can also do things.
Yeah.
Important matchup, Zoro versus Sanji.
Why are you doing this to me?
This is official and on the record, and whoever you choose will be the victor.
So I saw your poll.
Oh, that's very sneaky of you to have looked that up in advance.
So I saw the results of that, and that was overwhelming. I do agree. Zoro is the victor. I do think it's a much closer than people would expect with Sanji and his exoskeleton at this point. I do love Sanji, though. I love them both.
Yeah, that turned very political there for a second. I love both sides, but if you're going to twist my arm. What is the best part about One Piece?
Lore.
As in Trafalgar Law or as in L-O-R-E?
Yeah, it's funny because in my head, I was thinking of it. I was going to say law. And then it was like lore.
Lore.
Yeah, One Piece and lore. The world building and the history and everything that's built up over time. The best thing about One Piece.
What is the worst part about One Piece?
fights.
Really?
Fight expectations. I think what happens is that Oda does a masterful job of building up interactions, and then so you kind of play them in your head, and then sometimes it happens, then sometimes it's like a build up, and then they just walk away, like Doflamingo and Aokiji, like, oh shit, okay, it's happening, it's happening. Fuck. It didn't happen. Or the Odin flashback. Okay, we have Whitebeard, we have Roger, we have Rayleigh, we have Scopper, we have Odin. God, it's gonna be insane. It was insane, don't get me wrong. But like in my head, I thought of like a 5-chapter war of Rayleigh and Odin fighting, Scopper, me. It wasn't that. Right? I think if I had to pick the worst part about One Piece, I would say personally my expectation for fights.
If you had to get rid of one Straw Hat, which would it be and why?
Oh man. So, for Whole Cake Island, I would 100% would have said Brook. I had gotten tired of the panty joke. I no longer thought he was funny. However, Brook has proven his immense value in these last 2 or 3 arcs. I love Brook again. I would get rid of Chopper and recruit Law onto the ship.
I mean, that wasn't part of the question.
That is what I would do.
My poor baby. Look into his eyes and tell him that you're getting rid of him.
I'm sorry. Everyone else.
It's okay, Chopper.
Everyone else. I can't. Usopp can't go anywhere. Nami, Robin. We need those. Frankie, he's a ship, Jinbei. Hold on, let me think about this.
While you think, he's going to stay here and stare you in the eye throughout the rest of the video.
Okay. Chopper. Sorry. Final answer.
Yep, sure. All right. Fuck off, Chopper. Which animal in One Piece is your favorite?
Animal.
The animal, yes. I know there's a lot of great ones to choose from. Take your time.
My favorite animal in One Piece.
Yes.
Oh, crap. Does it matter if they've eaten a devil fruit or not?
No, they can be completely fruitless. Fuck. So far your answer is shit, fuck. Oh.
I'm going between Karoo and Ryunosuke. Part of Kung Fu Dugongs. Yeah.
Very good.
Let's go with them.
Just gonna make this clear. My answer would have been Southbird.
Interesting answer. Why the Southbird?
Because he's so damn smug. He just sits up there, looks down upon you. What is your favorite laugh in One Piece?
It's between Doflamingo and Whitebeard. It's like, what the fuck even is it? It's perfect. Like, it's just grumbling, mumbling, just in your throat things. But those two. Moria's up there as well for me.
What does he sound like?
I love the One Piece laughs, man. I love them so much. It is so crazy.
The other one that often gets brought up would be Perona. They're like, well, since you love to laugh, I've got some jokes for you, some One Piece themed jokes.
Oh God!
I would like to make very clear that these are not my jokes. I source these from members of the Grand Fleet, and I would like you to rate them out of 10.
Okay.
Are you ready to laugh? Maybe.
Maybe. Let's see.
What color is Sanji's bedroom?
Do I answer?
I asked you a question. This is how the joke goes. It's like, knock, knock. You've got to contribute.
Okay. Got it.
We'll do this, yeah. What color is Sanji's bedroom?
Yellow?
No, it's all blue.
Okay. I give that an 8.5.
8.5. Wow. All right.
I love dad jokes. So.
Why couldn't Brook learn the alphabet?
Why couldn't he?
Because he got stuck at sea.
Okay. 6.5.
6.5. Okay.
6.5.
We've taken a big step down, which is,
6.5.
I think, what I expected. How do you steal from CP9?
How do you steal from CP9?
You rob Lucci.
Okay, that's good. That's really good. That's a 9.
Why can't you trust Nami?
I don't know. Why can't you trust Nami?
Because she might end up robbing you.
6.5.
Why does no one have time for fishman jokes?
Why doesn't anyone?
Because they are long.
Okay. All right. 8.5.
Rob Lucci won the joke off. Do you like games, Mr. BDA Law?
I actually do.
That's wonderful, because we just so happen to have a game of hat in a bag set up to play. Would you like to play?
Okay, let's do this.
So, in case you're unfamiliar with the rules of hat in a bag, it's very simple. There is a One Piece themed hat in this bag.
Okay.
And it's going to be your job to guess what it is. You may ask me 3 yes or no questions, and then you will be forced to guess which hat is in the bag.
Simple.
Let's play hat in a bag.
Is the hat orange?
No.
Is the person who wears this hat a captain?
Yes.
Have we seen this hat in Wano so far?
Yes. So just to recap, it's not orange, the person is a captain, and the hat has been present on Wano, which the vague nature of which you said it can mean either flashbacks or in the present timeline.
I realized that when I asked that.
Unfortunately, the Wano flashback just so happens to take a journey around the whole world. It is time to guess which hat is in the bag.
Okay, the hat in the bag is the straw hat.
Yes, you are correct. It was the straw hat. Congratulations on winning hat in a bag. Which warlord of the sea does not deserve to be a warlord?
Mihawk.
Oh, go, expand.
I think Mihawk is way too powerful to be a warlord. It's like you're bringing somebody under you, or someone to control that you can't control, but they're just there to shoot the shit. And it's like, why even engage with this person that they're not going to do the things you ask of them? And so for Mihawk, I think he should not be a warlord because he is a Yonko without a crew.
Right, so your answer to that deliberately controversial question was essentially the job interview question of like, what's your greatest fault? Oh, I'm just too hard a worker for this job.
I'm too good for this, man. I'm way too good for this. All right. Shit, you're hired.
If Luffy wasn't the main character of One Piece, who would you like to follow?
If I had to choose a new main character, does it have to be...
No, you go on. Don't worry about what's happening here.
Does it have to be in the past or present? Doesn't matter.
The only one I'm going to say it does matter is it can't be in the future. It can't be someone that we haven't
Can't be
met.
Luffy's kid. Can't be Boofy being mentored by
Boofy?
Katakuri. No?
You want Boofy to take Luffy's place in One Piece.
Right, and then he's going to meet Katakuri and he's going to be like, that's going to be like his dad, like Whitebeard was to Ace. And he's going to try to like outdo his dad because his dad is so great.
Or sort of like the Luffy-Rayleigh relationship as well. Yeah.
Since we've been following the pirate, I would like to follow a Marine. And the most interesting Marine, I think, has been Garp. So I think Garp's journey to where he is, because he has a fucked up family. I don't know how Thanksgivings are there.
Quick response. Not allowed to think about this. First thing that comes off the top of your head, very important question. Who is the next Straw Hat? Go.
Yamato.
Easy. Well, thank you so much, BDA Law, for taking the time to participate in this shenaniganry. It went semi to plan, I would say.
No problem. I appreciate you having me on this shenaniganry. Is that a word?
It is now. You can check out BDA Law in the place. I'll have a link. Thank you again.